Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Got a Kiss-Inducing Quirk? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. He knew that it was stupid. Midoriya knew that this was his first chance to show the world, or at least Japan, that he's here, that he has the potential to be a hero people could believe in. All Might even told him that he needed to make an impact at the festival, and yet, instead of taking the safe route to the finals, he had decided to antagonize his opponent who just so happened to arguably be the strongest student in his class. Todoroki Shoto. The boy with the dual quirk. The boy who has the capability to wield both ice and fire, but at the time was determined to fight at half capacity by refusing to acknowledge the portion of his quirk that was inherited from his father, and even then he was a fierce contender. That's what most people saw him as: fierce, cold, and calculating. Midoriya didn't blame others for how they felt about Todoroki. If he was being honest, that was his first impression of the boy with the scar on his face as well. It wasn't until the green-haired boy was backed against the wall at the festival listening to the boy with two-toned hair explain his parents' marriage that Midoriya realized Todoroki was more than what others assumed of him. It wasn't until Midoriya looked into the heterochromic eyes of the boy across from him that he realized, above all, Todoroki was scared. Scared of his quirk, scared of his father, and absolutely terrified at the prospect that he was anything like the man who gave him his power over flames. Midoriya never thought he would see the tall, stoic boy before him look so small. Deep down in those mismatched irises, Midoriya could see just how broken Todoroki felt. Midoriya knew that feeling all too well and was familiar with how dangerous the emotion could become. For most of his life, Midoriya lived as a quirkless boy who would often bite off more than he could chew when it came to what he wanted out of life. He for so long wanted to stay friends with a boy who repeatedly made it clear that Midoriya was not someone whom was welcomed. He wanted so badly to be a hero that he would follow and diligently wrote notes on each and every article or video made about other heroes in hopes of learning a thing or two about them, but most of all he wanted to feel good enough. Midoriya's biggest fear was that he was exactly what others thought of him: worthless, useless, a burden. Maybe it was the fact that Midoriya knew how hard it was to swim when it felt like he was being drowned. How heavy his limbs felt when he tried to kick and struggle against the grip of the darkness that resided inside his mind had around his ankles. It took a long time for Midoriya to realize that the fight of his life would never be against a villain but against his own self-consciousness. He could see the same struggle within Todoroki. He pictured Todoroki waking up in the dead of night gasping for breath, reaching out for a hand to hold, anything to bring him warmth and stability. Just as he often used to. He pictured Todoroki's face as he lay in bed, slowly realizing that there was no one there to hold him and offer the comfort he so desperately craved. Just as he often used to before he had met All Might. Even now Midoriya still found himself woken up in the middle of the night while breathing heavily, thinking of whether or not his mentor would ever regret trusting a Deku with his power every once in a while. At least Midoriya knew that his mother was there to love him, and in the back of his mind he knew that if he truly was too bothered by his thoughts, he would be able to reach out to the number one hero with his concerns. Todoroki did not have people to lean on, and in the mornings after he would wake up with sweat pooled around the neckline of his shirt, he would not have someone willing to listen to his worries. Maybe that was why Midoriya wanted to save him, even just a little bit. Maybe that was why Midoriya reached out during their fight and demanded that Todoroki use his full power against him. Why he felt his mouth moving on its own without thought when he spewed out the fact that it was Todoroki Shoto that controlled his quirk, both halves of it, and not Todoroki Enji. Maybe that was why when even after losing the fight and damaging his arm that now would be forever littered with scars, Midoriya couldn't find it within himself to regret dragging out the fire half of his opponent's quirk. He knew it was stupid and rash and probably a terrible decision regarding his health, but Midoriya felt slightly okay because he thought maybe he had helped the boy with the dual quirk. Which is why he was able to still wear a smile on his face as he made his way back home after the festival had ended. It was why when he was being scolded by All Might and Recovery Girl that he honestly felt if needed, he would do the exact same thing all over again. He hoped that the next time he saw Todoroki that when he looked into those mismatched eyes that they would be a little lighter, a little less scared, and with his entire being he wished that Todoroki would learn that he was nothing like his father. Midoriya had no clue if he would be able to tell all those things just from the eyes of a classmate who most likely didn't even see the green-haired boy as a friend, but he felt if he was able to see darkness that he'd be able to see the lack of it as well. He never expected that he would be met with those eyes so quickly. The next morning, after having breakfast with his mother being smothered with worried hugs and light-hearted scoldings over his injuries, there was a quiet, almost timid-sounding series of knocks on his door. Izuku was left to open the door as his mother had already started doing the dishes. His mind wandered over to who could be at the door. He knew that he wasn't expecting any company, but he also was aware that his mother could have invited one of her friends over. His bet was on it being Mrs. Bakugo. They've been long-time friends, and Izuku knew how excited his mother was about his childhood friend's accomplishment of coming first in the festival, and he supposed that his mother would want to congratulate the family in person. Izuku found that the moment he opened his front door, the only thing on his mind was that he wished he had not worn his all-might pajama set to breakfast. He wouldn't have minded if it really were the Bakugis that had decided to visit, but luck happened to be against him, and the person who had been at his door was none other than Todoroki Shoto. The boy that he had least expected to turn up at his home unexpected at 10 o'clock in the morning. Izuku found his face heating up, most definitely turning an unsightly shade of pink when he locked eyes with the taller male. He opened his mouth to try and welcome the boy who somehow had tracked down his address but found that words were not coming to him. It didn't seem to matter too much to the two-toned boy as he rushed into his explanation of presence. I visited my mother. This was something that Izuku had not expected. He knew that Todoroki hadn't had contact with his mother for some time after the incident with the kettle from long ago. Of course he was happy for his classmate, but he didn't quite grasp why Todoroki decided that he was the person who should be informed about this. Izuku figured that maybe he was the only person outside of the family that Todoroki had told about his situation, and felt that if Todoroki wanted to talk about his experience, then he may as well let him. Oh. How did it go, Todoroki? Do you want to come in? Izuku opened his door wider as a gesture to show that he was serious about inviting his classmate in. Todoroki raised his hand, dismissing the idea while slightly shaking his head. No, thank you. This should not take long. Izuku didn't have to wait for Todoroki to continue with his explanation. I visited my mother because of what you said, Midoriya. I just came to thank you. Izuku didn't really know what to say. He was happy that he did something to push the boy closer to his mother, even if it really wasn't his place, but he really wasn't sure of what he said to do so. All he told Todoroki was that he was the sole owner of his quirk, and if he truly wanted to be a hero that he would have to work with both sides of him. His confusion must have been evident on his face because his visitor once again continued on with what he had to say while turning his head to the side, breaking eye contact. I felt guilty for years because of what happened. I thought I was the reason why she had to leave. My face, my half that was given to me from my father, pushed her over the edge, and she fell into a mental state so severe she had no choice but to mutilate it. I refused to let my father control me by deciding not to use his quirk no matter what, or I thought that was what I was doing. Todoroki took a moment to lock eyes with Izuku once more. It was only a second or two before the larger boy began to speak again, but it felt like much longer. Izuku took his chance to once again search his former opponent's eyes for any sign of fear. Any sign of darkness. Of course he found some. He knew it would never be gone overnight and probably would even still be there for years to come, but he realized that the darkness had lifted ever so slightly. There Midoriya could see a sliver of hope and a sliver of love in the eyes of the scarred boy in front of him. You proved me wrong, Midoriya, and I just needed to tell you. I was never preventing my father from controlling me, I was only changing the way that he moved me. I was still a puppet on his string that did mostly as he pleased with the illusion of it being of my choosing. Maybe he wasn't controlling my quirk, but he was still always on my mind and making me think that I didn't deserve the other family members that I have. I was so convinced that if my mother saw me, saw my fire, saw whatever she did the same day those years ago, that she would hate me all over again. But I was wrong. I visited her and she was ecstatic and in tears, and she told me that she loved me. There was a deep shuddering breath that could be heard, and Izuku had no clue whether it was coming from him or Todoroki. The only thing that mattered was that even for a few minutes Todoroki felt loved and was thanking Izuku for it. He wanted to contribute something to the conversation, convey that he really did not do much and that he was sure that Todoroki's mother would have said that she loves him even if Izuku didn't say anything to Todoroki, but the words were lost on his tongue. "I just needed you to know what you did for me, Midoriya," Todoroki stated, and for some reason Izuku had never felt so flustered before. His arms started waving in front of him as a way to stop the thanks that was coming his way. He didn't want to take credit for a mother loving their child, and he liked to think that eventually Todoroki would have reached the same conclusion by himself. A stern hand gripped his wrist rather tightly, halting his movement. A small look of horror danced in the heterochromic eyes as he inspected Izuku's arm that was littered with new scars from their fight the day before. "Those are from me, from my quirk." Todoroki's voice no longer held any sort of emotion, he was simply stating a fact. Izuku half expected the other boy to once again refuse to use his fire quirk now that he saw the extent of damage that it had done to his arm. Now it was fear that bounced in Izuku's eyes, fear for his classmate, fear for someone that he was coming to care about. "I'm sorry. I will work harder on my quirk so that I can better control it." Todoroki's voice was firm and held resolve. Izuku could see that the boy in front of him, whose eyes used to be filled with fear, now held determination inside, and dare he say that he saw a small fire brewing within them. Izuku couldn't help but feel proud for being the one to help put that spark there. "No!" Izuku yelled. He hadn't meant to be so loud, but he couldn't hold it in any longer. "I mean, yes, you should work on your quirk, but don't say sorry. Don't feel bad, Todoroki." A small smile slipped its way onto the taller boy's face. Gently he lifted Izuku's hand higher, rubbed his thumb over the newly formed skin, and brought his lips over one of the more prominent scars. He let them linger for a few moments before he pulled himself away and then bid farewell to Izuku after once again saying thank you. The green-haired boy stood in his doorway watching as his classmate disappeared around the street corner, gathering his thoughts. Todoroki kissed him. He kissed his hand and said thank you. Todoroki thanked him for his help. Izuku felt pride swell from his gut and travel up through his chest as he realized he may have saved someone. He may have saved his classmate, and hopefully next time he looks at those mismatched eyes, maybe he'll see a little happiness within them. Heartsuit, 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 heartsuit. So this isn't super fluffy, it actually has a lot of angst. I think? Maybe? I just kinda like the idea. Smiley face. Let me know what you think and who you guys might want to see give Aizu a lil kiss next. Midoriya had always felt that he was observant, usually looking further into things than needed, overthinking to the point that his thoughts tumbled out of his mouth quickly and most oftentimes unintelligibly, without him realizing. He took pride in his analytical skills, and in his opinion it helped set him apart from the others, giving him a slight boost over his classmates and even villains when forced. It was because of this fact that he was rather embarrassed to say that he hadn't noticed when he had been kidnapped. Technically speaking, he was safe, most likely. Probably not. It wasn't like he was taken by the League of Villains like Kaken had been, but he still felt that the pink arm wrapped around his shoulders was leading him into a lion's den. Actually, he would have been much more at ease if he were to have been sacrificed to some oversized cats rather than thrown next to the ticking time bomb that happened to be his childhood companion. He knew that it was his fault for being in this mess. Midoriya blamed himself for trusting the overzealous classmate. Ashido, from what he could remember, had a reputation within the class for being a bit of a troublemaker. She did what she wanted, whenever she wanted, with whom she wanted to. Midoriya knew he should have put up a little more of a fight when she had asked him to sit with her and the rest of the Baku squad at the lunch table. Instead, he just politely declined and told her that he already had plans with his usual lunch group. Ashido gave a little pout but didn't say much other than the fact that she would invite him some other time. Midoriya was silly to think that he could avoid the acid user for long. A week went by with the same routine. The bell for lunch would ring, Ashido would ask him to eat with her and her friends, he would kindly decline but thank her for the offer, she would pout and some days she would plead a little for him to join. Just this one time, he would come up with an excuse that allowed him to pass up the chance and be on his way to his usual table. Midoriya thought that eventually his pink classmate would give up and stop making him feel guilty for putting his safety first. It wasn't like Midoriya disliked Ishido, it was quite the opposite actually. He really thought of her as a friend and wouldn't have minded spending time with her to hang out. What he did mind was that she only asked him during lunch, making it quite clear that she wanted him to hang out with all of her other friends as well, including Kaken. Midoriya doesn't dislike Kaken either. He looks up to the boy who he grew up with, and no matter how badly he wished to patch up whatever rough relationship that they have, he knew that the other had no such desire. He also knew it was inevitable that whenever he was near the explosive blonde he would manage to do something wrong, making his past friend angry, who would then hurl insults at Midoriya as well as anyone else who happened to find themselves within the danger zone. Despite what everyone else thought, Midoriya had a slight sense of self-preservation. What he hadn't realized was that things were going according to the acid user's plan. Midoriya never realized that while he liked to observe others, taking notes on their lives and interests, he was being studied as well. So when the bell rang signaling it was time to make his way to the cafeteria, he was already expecting the bubblegum-looking girl to approach him. He was ready for her to sling her arm around his shoulder. Her arm was much more muscular and strong than what he thought it was, but was surprised when instead of asking him to join her friends she dove into a conversation about quirks. Ishido told him that she wanted help thinking of new ways to utilize her acid in a more defensive way, while subtly leading him towards the very table he had been avoiding. Not that Midoriya had noticed at first. He was too engrossed in the possibilities that his friend's quirk held to realize that Ishido didn't actually want any help. He figured out her master plan when he was only a few steps away, and when he tried to wiggle out of her embrace he felt her arm flex, effectively caging him in and sealing his fate. There he was standing in front of a den full of lions who were armed with quirks, the den full of lions who was run by one specific lion who enjoyed snapping his jaws at a certain green-haired prey. There he was sweating more than he should and slightly glaring at his pink-skinned kidnapper while trying to stutter out a reason why he shouldn't be here. "Oh, calm down, Midoriya. You're already here, just sit," she said with a grin as she loosened her almost choke hold around his neck. "Wait a minute. I already told Ida and Todoroki that I would go over our English assignment." It wasn't a lie actually. The other boys were expecting Midoriya for a bit of help on their homework, but it didn't seem as though Ishido cared about his excuse. This became even more evident as she shoved him into the space next to Kaken and seating herself on the other side of the one for all user. Midoriya wasn't the only one complaining. Kaken had let loose a large number of profanities that expressed his displeasure for the green-haired boy's presence, which were accompanied by a few small sparks that ignited in the palm of his hands. It seemed that Midoriya was the only one at the table who took any of the blonde's threats seriously, as the others who sat around him decided it was time for greetings. "Midoriya. Hey, it's about time Mina was able to convince you to hang with us," Kaminari exclaimed, slightly bouncing in his chair with excitement. A smile was stretched onto the electric boy's face, making Midoriya's heat up under the attention. There was a chorus of greetings that followed, flowing from his other classmates. Kirishima, Shiro, and unexpectedly Kyoka, who accompanied the group every so often. The green-haired boy found that a small smile had also crept onto his face as well. If he was honest, he wasn't expecting such a warm welcome. He waved back, trying to show at least some enthusiasm for the group. "All you guys, we made him blush. Look at the cute little bean." Ishido gushed over Midoriya as she pinching his cheeks, twisting and pulling them. Her antics slightly reminded him of how his grandmother used to greet him at his family visits. She would poke and prod and pinch anywhere that she could get her hands on. He found himself relaxing into Ishido's embrace with a familiar feeling of fondness pooling inside of him. "Geez, Mina, cool it or the poor guy won't have any cheeks at all," Shiro pointed out. "I wouldn't say too much or you might be next," Kyoko warned the tape user. Apparently this must be a common occurrence for the group of friends. Midoriya decided to file the information somewhere in the back of his mind for future use. "Stop attacking him, raccoon eyes. You're just like his demon grandmother." Midoriya was a little taken aback by Kaken's demand for two reasons. The first being that he had never expected the red-eyed blonde to stick up for him at all, let alone against one of his close friends. Not that Kaken would ever admit to anyone that he considered the extras, that he hangs out with to be worth his time, let alone tell them that he considered them his friends. The second being that his grandmother had passed away by the time that Midoriya was 7, meaning that Kaken retained this information about his rival for years after he had decided that the green-haired boy was Deku. Midoriya blinked his owlish eyes up at Kaken. "Don't look at me like that, Deku. Everybody has a grab-happy grandparent. You ain't special for me knowing it." Ashido didn't get the memo, however. She was very excited at the fact that it seemed the two boys were getting along. Her squeals were loud, and while the others at the table were quick to cover their ears, Midoriya found his smile widening at the sight. He loved when others were happy, and if he was honest with himself, he too was a little giddy at how his childhood friend wasn't currently at his throat. It had to be a record amount of time. "So what took you so long, man? We've been sending Mina out for like a week to fetch you." Kirishima seemed to genuinely be curious and maybe a little bit sad that Midoriya hadn't agreed to sit with them sooner. It never occurred to him that the others may have been in on the fact that the girl was seeking him out. Midoriya just figured that she was working on her own, and if he were to ever take her up on the offer, that he would be greeted with confused stares and awkward conversation from people who had no idea why he was there in the first place. He started to feel a bit guilty when looking at his red-haired classmate. "I didn't mean to offend you guys, I swear." Midoriya found that his hands were clasped in front of him on his lap, and his voice started to grow softer with each word. "I wasn't aware that Ashido had gotten everyone's permission for me to be here." His eyes traveled up to Kaken silently and effectively conveying that he was the reason for Midoriya's apprehension. He didn't mean to call the boy out, but it wasn't like everyone was new to the tension that the two boys held around each other. Midoriya felt his chin being pushed up by delicate fingers and dragged to his other side, towards Ashido. He held his breath as their eyes locked. He'd never been in a situation where a girl was holding his face between her palms while leaning towards him. Panic struck the green-haired boy, for he liked the pink girl, but he didn't like her. He had no clue what to do because from all the movies he'd seen and books that he'd read, he knew that moments like these are when one person is supposed to kiss the other. Trying to rack his brain on how to politely break the dark-eyed girl's heart and rush out of the room without being disrespectful, he almost didn't feel the slight brush and nuzzle of their noses together. Ashido moved her head side to side, making their noses slip over each other while she quietly giggled. It felt NTMT to the boy, but it didn't exactly feel uncomfortable. His face flamed a dark shade of red that most likely reminded his table mates of Christmas as it clashed against the color of hair. "What are you doing, Ashido?" He wasn't complaining, but he was curious of the odd action. "It's called an kunai kiss, Midoriya. I like to do this with all of my friends to show them how much I care about them." Tears began to form in his eyes as she released her hold on his head. He had always considered her to be his friend, but he never really thought that his feelings were reciprocated. Midoriya knew that he had a few friends here at UA, but never had they really said aloud that they considered him to be a close person whom they cared about. He wasn't used to being special. "Thank you, Ashido. I care for you as well." There it was, his blinding smile that encompassed most of his face. The one that others seemed to think of as his trademark. Midoriya felt his nerves wash away as he turned and fell into easy conversation with Kyoko about music. He relaxed even more after trading workout secrets with Kirishima and setting a date for when they should do some exercises together, inviting the rest of the table to accompany them as well. Midoriya was especially surprised when Kaken had agreed to join a sparring session with him, not once fighting against the invitation and seeming dare he say happy about it. The green-haired boy decided that maybe sitting here every once in a while wouldn't be such a bad thing, and maybe he'd let his sneaky pink-haired friend kidnap him more often. It's no secret that Midoriya Izuku had made a second home for himself inside the infirmary of his high school. More often than not, he could be seen sporting the ever-attractive accessory of a cast around his arm, and while most of the school students found it slightly comical that the green-haired boy was always running around getting himself in trouble, there was still a handful of people who were worried for him. The list was actually quite long, not that Midoriya would know about it. His classmates recognized that he seemed to have a streak of recklessness. He was extremely careful when it came to helping others and would do absolutely everything in his power to save them. However, he held far less care for himself. Individually, most of his friends had tried to subtly talk some sense into him by expressing their concerns. Todoroki explained that while he was flattered that Midoriya was willing to crush his hands for his sake, he wished that the green-haired boy would keep himself intact instead. Uraraka and Ida tried to convey just how scared they both feel. Whenever he ended up needing to be carried out of the room on a stretcher, Kirishima gushed about how manly he thought the other was while protecting people, but also brought up the fact that Midoriya had to still be alive to save other people in the future. To everyone's surprise, Kaken had even tried to quite literally shake some sense into the other by grabbing his collar and throwing smaller boy's body around like a rag doll, screaming in his face about how the sheet nerd was gonna get himself killed one day and that he wasn't allowed to die unless it was by the blonde's hands himself. Each time Midoriya would flash a smile and thank them for their concern while telling them that he didn't ever actually mean to injure himself. Things just happen. Not once had he been able to make his classmates feel better. Students started trying to find alternate ways of helping their classmate. It became obvious that they were not going to be able to convince the so-called broccoli boy by themselves. Aizawa was eventually asked to intervene by a couple of Midoriya's friends, and with a sigh he had set out to talk to his number one problem child. He understood both sides of the coin. On one hand, he too felt nervous for the boy each time he was rushed to Recovery Girl and was often angry at himself for not being able to stop his self-destructive antics. He also knew that if the roles were reversed that he most likely would do exactly what Midoriya does. He felt almost like a hypocrite while asking the boy to put himself before others once in a while, considering how he single-handedly threw himself at multiple villains at USJ knowing that he most likely wasn't going to win such a fight. He saw the same glint in those green eyes that Aizawa held in his own, and it scared him. It wasn't that the boy didn't think before moving himself into the arms of danger. His teacher realized that Midoriya knew of the consequences beforehand and still decided to sacrifice a few bones for the health of others. Which is why he had decided to sit down with the boy and discuss why he felt it was okay to dismantle his body on a weekly basis. The answer left the rugged teacher worried. "Really, I don't try to get hurt, honest," he said with a flushed face and frantic hand gestures. "It's just that, well, you see, they're going to be great heroes someday, you know? I can feel it, and if I can do anything to help them, I will." Green eyes met those of his teachers, and the boy could tell that the others still didn't understand. "I mean, if I have to break a few bones to help them out, I will. Usually it's just a few fingers and maybe my arm every so often, but I can take it." Aizawa furrowed his eyebrows. If he was honest, he had no clue what the boy was talking about. How could breaking his fingers in class help out the other students? To him, an injured hero was more of a hindrance than anything. "How does you injuring yourself help others, Midoriya?" he found himself asking. "I need to push myself so that they'll get stronger, Mr. Aizawa. I gotta give my all so that they can too." Kaken needs someone willing to push themselves to the limit so that he can have somebody to compete with. Uraraka needs someone to fight her with everything they have so that she knows in a real situation that she can handle it, and Todoroki needs someone to spar with so that he can become comfortable with both halves of himself. And Midoriya started to mumble and drift off seemingly in his own world. His voice grew smaller and smaller. "I can't control my quirk yet, Aizawa-sensei, but I still need to use it. It's important to me that I help my friends achieve their dreams." The conversation ended shortly after Midoriya's mini-speech, and Aizawa soon found himself stuck. It hurt his pride, but the tired teacher knew that he needed help with the problem child. Just as everyone was aware of Midoriya's frequent visits to the nurse, they were even more aware of his everlasting fanboy crush on All Might. If it wasn't obvious that the boy's green eyes shone brighter when taking in the sight of his oversized teacher and mentor, then the thought was hit home whenever Midoriya would yell out the hero's name anytime they happened to be in the same room. His enthusiasm was endearing to say the least. Which is why Aizawa thought that if anyone could talk to Midoriya and slip him some advice that the kid would listen to, it would be All Might. So after a brief meeting with his coworker, All Might set off with the task of taming his beast of a student. He asked Midoriya to accompany him in the teacher's lounge for lunch one day so that they could have a private conversation. It didn't happen too often, but it wasn't a surprise to his classmates when they saw Midoriya leave with their teacher. They were aware that the two had some sort of bond with one another. All Might started their talk by asking about One for All and the new moves that his pupil was working on, which in turn Midoriya would answer with high enthusiasm and wild hand gestures that showed how excited he was. All Might loved to see the passion that his successor overflowed with when speaking about heroics and felt almost bad about having to break off his rant to talk about the real reason he was there. Midoriya, my boy, it has come to my attention that some people are worried for you. You need to be more careful, son. All Might disliked the look that flashed on his young successor's face. All Might, I'm really happy that everyone cares about me enough to worry, but I'm fine, I swear. A whisper-like answer fell from the boy's lips. I think perhaps the reason why we are all worried for you is because more often than not, you aren't fine and it hurts us to see you that way. All Might felt that if anything were to be able to convince Midoriya to care for himself, it would be guilt. He hated to manipulate his student, but he knew that the green-haired boy would do anything to help others, and maybe keeping better care of himself would do just that. I'm not trying to hurt them. It's just my feet always move. All Might, my brain gets stuck on what could go wrong or how they could be injured or how I could help them improve, and I'm set in motion like my body has a mind of its own. All Might keeps telling me that I need to stop and that I need to think, but it's just like with the sludge villain. My legs move before I can tell them not to. Midoriya's eyes were wet and brimming with tears as he tried to wipe them. But I don't get why I keep getting in trouble for it, All Might. Heroes are supposed to be selfless, and we all know that this is a dangerous job to have, but I'm the only one getting in trouble. You told me that the sign of a true hero often was that they move before they can think, and that's what I do. All Might, you chose me to be your successor because of how I jumped in during the sludge villain incident, and now I'm not supposed to do what made you notice me. It hurts and it's hard, and all I want to do is be a hero. All Might could now see why his colleague was disturbed by his pupil. Midoriya genuinely did not seem to think breaking his limbs was any sort of big deal. He didn't know how to convey that maybe if Midoriya kept breaking his bones that one day he would end up like All Might. One day he would end up with limited time to save others, and it would torture the poor kid. Instead of telling the green-haired boy how he felt, the skeleton-like teacher just gathered his beloved student and hugged him. A week later, the entire class of 1A was sitting on edge, everyone but Midoriya, that is. It had been a while since he was sent to Recovery Girl, and the whole class felt that something was brewing. Their overpowered friend hardly ever went this long without the snapping of at least a finger, and it felt off. They could all tell that he was trying his best to hold himself back from flinging himself in front of a fist every 5 seconds. They all knew that they should be proud of him and happy that maybe one of their teachers was able to get through to him, but now he seemed a bit different. But on Midoriya-like. He had always been someone to overthink in every situation, but never had it impeded on his time in their heroics class, until now. His punches were only half delivered, and his classmates could tell that he was second-guessing himself while working on any of his new moves. Somehow this hurt them more. Sure, it hurt to see Midoriya willingly snap himself in half, but it felt worse to see him break down internally. Tensions were high, and it became harder and harder for everyone to pretend that they weren't feeling it. It wasn't long before the class-designated hothead picked a fight with the first person who happened to get on his nerves, which unsurprisingly turned out to be the half-and-half bestiardi himself, who happened to also be taking Midoriya's sudden change to heart. They weren't sure exactly how it happened. Some words were exchanged between the two students, and then an all-out brawl followed while they were just outside of the dorm building. It started with quirkless wrestling, then moved to hard hits and kicks being thrown between the two, then there were sparks everywhere and ice at their feet. The class watched in horror and confusion as two of their classmates ruthlessly threw themselves at each other. Neither seemed to be holding anything back. Todoroki even happened to be using the flames on his left side that he seemed to reserve for sparring with Midoriya only. Ida had left to grab a teacher to stop the fight, but it became apparent to the class that neither would stop until the other wasn't moving. A flash of green appeared between the two driving forces trying to separate them, only to be engulfed in a mixture of ice, flames, and explosions. Screams tore through the air as 2 out of the 3 boys flew to the side upon impact. A bloodied blonde on the right and a bruised heterochromic boy on the left. It was obvious that neither had received the brunt of the attack as the crowd turned their attention to the boy who was left standing. There Midoriya stood with his arms spread at either side of him, tinted a sickly purple color, one that the class recognized from the sports festival. His uniform was scorched and torn, his face was scratched and bloodied, his eyes were full of tears. "Stop, please!" the injured boy screamed. I don't understand why you would try to hurt yourselves and fight each other, just stop. The two boys on the side stood up wide-eyed and afraid for the boy who stood and yelled, afraid of what they had done. They both were rather unharmed as long as you don't count their scrapes, scratches and bruises. Midoriya had jumped in the middle of their fight before they were able to land any serious blows to each other. Bakuga didn't know whether or not he and Todoroki were responsible for breaking the nerd's arms, but he felt a lump form in his throat at the thought. Todoroki knew that either way they were the ones who hurt him. No one said a word until Aizawa-sensei had finally arrived and sentenced Bakugo and Todoroki to march themselves over to the infirmary. One look at Midoriya made him grit his teeth in anger. This was exactly what he knew would happen. The kid was once again bloodied, bruised and broken. He didn't realize that he was swearing profanities out loud while scooping up his student until Kirishima started to speed walk next to him. Aizawa-sensei, well, I just want you to know that it really isn't Midoriya's fault. He stopped Bakugo and Todoroki before it was too late. Just please don't get him in trouble. He pleaded with his teacher to not be mad at the lump in his arms. He explained what happened as best as he possibly could, telling Aizawa how scared everyone was and how seriously he thought both the other boys would have been injured if Midoriya hadn't have intervened. When they arrived at the infirmary, he thanked Kirishima and dismissed him before delivering the battered boy to Recovery Girl and explained the situation. She was already filled in on everything, being that Bakugo and Todoroki had already beat him to the punch. Both students were patched up and sitting on medical beds waiting for Midoriya with guilty expressions on their faces. Expressions that seemed to deepen even more at the sight of their classmate who was passed out in their teacher's arms. Recovery Girl rushed to Midoriya and ushered Aizawa to lay him down carefully on the last empty bed in the room. Her inspection of the green-hair boy took longer than normal, most likely because her vision was impaired by the tears that were leaking down her face as she gently handled the broken student before her. She knew what to expect, having been told the story of what happened, but her heart hurt for Midoriya. Everything he did was for others, every broken bone, every scrape, every bruise, everything and anything that he did was fueled by his insatiable need to help and please. Burned at the thought that he wanted to save everyone but himself. Recovery Girl kissed his forehead, healing some of his injury, but she knew that he once again would be heading home in casts. The two boys waited for a few hours hoping that Midoriya would wake up so that they could apologize, but were eventually summoned to Nedza's office where they received house arrest for a week at least. After Midoriya wakes up, they were told that he would give input on whether he thinks they should receive harsher punishment, but both students knew he would advocate for less time if possible. That's just how he was. Eventually Midoriya woke up sore and tired but happy to see that neither boys accompanied him at the infirmary, knowing that it meant that they were fine and most likely studying at the dorms. He felt himself freeze under the glare of Recovery Girl and braced himself for yet another lecture about how reckless and foolish he was. Midoriya couldn't force himself to meet the gaze of her another person that he let down. "I'm sorry," he managed to squeak out. "Midoriya, can I ask you something, dear?" He was surprised to be met with such a calm and soothing voice. He was prepared to receive the scolding of a lifetime. Yeah, of course, Recovery Girl, anything." She took a moment to take a seat on the foot of his medical bed, rubbing soothing circles on his calf to calm him down. A deep breath was released as she went on to ask what was bothering her. "Midoriya, you do know that you're important too, right? Aizawa and All Might told me about your conversations with them, and I see that they don't understand." Her eyes met green and found that maybe he didn't know, for what she saw was confusion laced in the boy's face. "You want to help your friends become heroes and you want to save other people too, but what about yourself? You deserve to be safe too, and you deserve to reach your goal of being a hero. You can help them without harming yourself. Yes, there will be injuries once in a while, and yes, there will be times where you need to throw yourself into action, but there are also times where you need to know that it's not all on you. You don't need to single-handedly stop other people from getting hurt. Honey, as much as you don't want to see them injured, it hurts them to watch you tear yourself apart right in front of them." Midoriya was no stranger to the love yourself talk. He had received many from his mother and a few from All Might, but for some reason when it came from Recovery Girl it felt more real. He sat up as much as possible and went to speak but was interrupted. Recovery Girl wasn't finished. You are destined to be a great hero Midoriya Izuku Hero Deku. You will have so many people who look up to you. You already do now. I believe in you and your skill, but you need to learn to rely on others and trust that they care about you as much as you do for them. You deserve happiness, and you too deserve to accomplish your dream. Soft lips met his forehead, not to heal him physically, for his energy was already significantly drained, but to comfort him. Recovery Girl desperately hoped that she was able to show Midoriya how she and everyone else cared for him. With one last kiss left on his forehead, he was told that he was free to go back to the dorms after being instructed to return to her tomorrow before class for another round of healing. With sore arms, Midoriya made his way back to the dorms feeling a little lighter, and although his bones were, once again, broken even after Recovery Girl's healing kiss, he felt a little more put together. A little less lost. According to their classmates, Aoyama Yuga held a strange fondness for the green-haired boy in their class. They weren't sure what brought the two together. Aoyama and Midoriya on all accounts seemed like polar opposites. People perceived the blonde to be a bit self-centered, not in a way where he hurt people's feelings. They felt he was genuinely a good guy, but in the way where he was always thinking of himself. They lost track of the amount of times where someone would be having a conversation with him, and in the middle of it the sparkly boy would zone out, claiming to be thinking of an outfit he wanted to put together or a new makeup palette that he was dying to try. It never actually bothered his classmates. They accepted that he was a bit eccentric. Although Aoyama was a very talkative and extroverted guy, no one ever saw him make an attempt of befriending any of them. Until Midoriya Izuku. It came as a surprise when one day they saw the blonde trapeze his way over to Midoriya before lunch while calling out to him with a wave and a bright smile. "Yoo-hoo! Midoriya-kun, I've got some new pastries for us to try. Come sit with me, darling." What wasn't a surprise was how Midoriya had accepted the invitation. The boy was an over-the-top people-pleaser, willing to do just about anything for anyone to make sure that they kept a smile on their face. With a slight blush and a bit of a stutter, the freckled boy agreed that they would share the meal with each other. In the week following the lunch incident, their classmates decided to start keeping tabs on the new duo. It wasn't really a secret that Midoriya had a knack for adopting people and convincing them to be his friends. No matter how tough the exterior, the doe-eyed boy always managed to melt their hearts. A prime example being the ever-frosty Todoroki boy who, after months of pestering, finally allowed himself to be dragged into Midoriya's friendship circle. His reach extended beyond those that resided in Class 1A after convicting the ever-antisocial Shinso from 1C and the timid third-year student Amaki to join him on a couple cafe excursions. The reason why his class was so interested was because for the first time it looked as though he was the one who was being lured into companionship. At first it started with Aoyama offering the boy small snacks such as sweets and cheese. Hagakure compared it to setting a trap for a little mouse. Things then advanced to seeing the two walking between classes with each other and making plans to study in the other's rooms, something that once again confused their classmates because it was well known that Aoyama never cracked open his textbooks on his own accord. It was even more surprising when Uraraka noticed the lavender paint on Midoriya's nails while in the common room one morning. "Midoriya, I didn't know that you painted your nails," exclaimed when gently grabbing a hold of his hands, bringing them close to her face for further inspection. "Wow, these are done really well. Could you do mine sometime?" "Oh well, I didn't actually paint them. Aoyama did. He said that he really needed the practice, but his nails were already done, and so he asked me to help him, and then he said that purple would be a really good color on me, and so here we are. But I'm sure that if you asked him he'd be happy to do it for you, Uraraka." Midoriya rubbed the back of his neck out of embarrassment. He could feel his cheeks heating up from the attention and a sheepish grin make its way onto his lips. Really, he wasn't ashamed of having his nails painted. If he was being honest, he thought that they looked nice and agreed with his friend that yeah, he really did look pretty okay in purple. He was well aware that having his nails painted didn't make him any less of a man and knew that it was only a matter of time before his friend requested his help once more with a different color to try. So he didn't mind telling Uraraka about it. What he was embarrassed about was the fact that his classmate was watching him close enough to notice his nails. After agreeing to talk with Aoyama about getting help with her nails, Uraraka left Midoriya in favor of basking in her confusion in the comfort of her own bedroom. She wasn't bothered by his nails, and she wasn't bothered about the fact that her green-haired friend was becoming close to someone else. She was only bothered by the fact that he had yet to tell her about his budding relationship. The gravity-defying girl thought that her and Midoriya had gotten pretty close this year. In fact, she felt that they both held the title of best friend for one another, and as his best friend Uraraka thought that she would have even trusted with the new information. In the past, her friend had always clued her in on his plans to befriend somebody and even tried to rope her in to help him out. It hurt her feelings that she wasn't included this time around. It wasn't as though the two boys were being secretive about how often they talked. They often made plans with one another in front of other students. The blonde could be heard calling to Midoriya most days, already having an activity planned for the two of them. Uraraka just felt left out. She absolutely did not want to be asked to hang out with the two boys. She felt that if forced to spend more than 2 hours with the sparkling boy that she may implode. She just wanted Midoriya to willingly tell her about his life. She wanted to look after her friend. She thought the blonde's sudden interest in the green boy was suspicious, and she just didn't want her friend to get hurt. Aoyama, despite popular belief, did not focus solely on himself. He just wanted everyone else's eyes on him. In order to keep their attention, he had to understand his classmates' inner workings and had to make sure that he always looked his best. At first, he honestly did not want to be friends with Midoriya. He wanted the green boy's attention. Aoyama was no fool. He knew that Midoriya was destined for great things. He knew that his classmate had all the qualities of a successful hero and desperately sought him out because of it. The sparkly boy felt that if he could gain the affection of someone with such potential, then just maybe he might have some as well. That's how it started. He began by watching the doe-eyed boy. He studied how Midoriya talked with others, his favorite food, his fashion sense, or lack thereof, and how he performed in class. Aoyama thought the first few times that his classmate hurt himself were just a couple of fluke accidents. Of course, a hard hit from Bakugo could break a finger or two. It was nothing to be weary of. However, the more that the blonde observed his accident-prone classmate, the more that he realized that they were more alike than he thought. It was common knowledge that Aoyama would get frequent stomach aches from the overusage of his quirk. All quirks have their drawbacks, and he had learned to accept his. Acceptance never made the hospital trips and constant pain when he was younger any easier. He could remember quite a few times when his quirk was first developing, before he had really gotten the hang of it, where he slept in a hospital bed more than his own at home. His doctor had explained that the boy's quirk was too strong for his body. He and his quirk were incompatible. Of course, the bright boy wouldn't let that set him back. He wanted the whole world to see him, and what better way to have the world view him than to be a hero? It took years of quirk counseling and many bottles of nausea medicine for him to figure out his own limits and when he should push them. He could recognize the signs of someone whose body was working against them, the signs of someone whose quirk was like his. After a few class PRs, he had figured that it was Midoriya's own quirk that was working against his body, and he was annoyed. For someone who claimed to want to be a hero, Aoyama felt that the green-eyed boy had to have been either crazy or lazy to have not gained control of his quirk yet. The blonde could remember how desperate he was to stop the pain in himself when he was younger and was absolutely stunned to see that his classmate was still struggling as Aoyama had. How had Midoriya not progressed with his quirk usage after having it for years? It wasn't until Aoyama had accidentally overheard a conversation between Midoriya and his friends that he learned the green-haired boy was a late bloomer. He could feel the irritation that riddled his skin every time he came in contact with his freckled classmate fade away and be replaced with understanding. Pain and understanding. In the back of his mind, he figured that Midoriya had it slightly worse than himself. The boy frequently broke his bones seemingly every other day, but Aoyama never really thought that this was something new. He thought that his classmate had been dealing with such a thing for his whole life and had all this time to try to correct it. The blonde felt his stomach curl and coil at the thought of Midoriya having to experience the beginner workings of his quirk all by himself. Aoyama thought back to the nights where he would lay awake crying because he felt his own body hated him and wondered if his classmate felt the same fear. He wondered if Midoriya had anyone who knew what he was going through. Aoyama was fortunate enough to have his quirk be quite similar to others in his family, making it so that he had plenty of people to help him through the early years of his quirk development. He had no clue how he would have handled such pain without the support of his family. For some reason he had a gut feeling that his freckled classmate did not have such support, and for the first time he wanted to be that someone for another person. He knew that realistically he couldn't help Midoriya with controlling his quirk. He had other teachers for that, but he could take his mind off of it. He could make sure that the green-eyed boy knew that he wasn't alone, that he wasn't some freak whose body was meant to wither. So he decided to give the kid the honor of being his friend. Aoyama wanted to start small. He would first show interest in the boy by offering snacks and small talk. Only later down the line would he offer to make Midoriya as sparkly, bright, and beautiful as himself. Maybe it wouldn't be a bad thing to have another to shine with him. Midoriya was always peculiar to the blonde. He felt that the boy was a bit too jumpy and a bit too dumpy in the fashion department for his taste, but the more time that he spent with his classmate, the more that he genuinely started to enjoy it. He liked how Midoriya wanted to help him succeed. He liked how Midoriya was interested in the pastries and French culture that he talked about. He liked that Midoriya never judged him for his fashion sense or his love of makeup, going as far as letting Aoyama dress him up and play makeover with him basically whenever he was asked. Maybe most of all, he liked how he didn't feel like he had to beg for Midoriya's attention. Whenever he was with his classmate, Aoyama felt that he didn't have to try to make himself seem larger than life. He could tell by the way that his friend looked at him that Midoriya truly felt Aoyama was amazing. Eventually Aoyama started to do things for Midoriya that he never thought he would do for anyone other than himself. He wanted to make the green boy shine. Sometimes he could feel the urge to take the boy's hands and yell to the rest of the class and announce that they were friends. Sometimes he did. Sometimes instead of using his words he would give matching makeovers before classes, nothing too heavy, maybe a little light eyeshadow or eyeliner and definitely matching hairstyles once in a while. Just so that the other would know how close they are. He, of course, would ask his friend before touching a hair on his head but was always met by a reassuring smile and him saying that he trusted Aoyama. Something that others rarely did. Sometimes instead of shouting that he cared for Midoriya, he would simply grab the sides of his face and kiss all around the boy's chubby little chipmunk cheeks. His lips would leave a trail of chapstick that would remain a tad bit sticky, but neither boys minded. Midoriya without fail would become flush and scrunch his nose. His eyes always lit up whenever Aoyama kissed his face. The blonde couldn't help but look at how happy Midoriya was, how pretty, how bright his new friend was. Maybe it really isn't a bad thing to have someone to sparkle with. He loved when Midoriya's eyes would brighten up after a kiss. It's no surprise that Bakugo Katsuki was never like other children. The blonde, even from a young age, had always been more prone to sudden outbursts. Fits of rage often followed by mild spurts of violence was how he always had communicated with others. Really, that was the language that he knew best. Katsuki was raised on harsh words and swift thumps to the back of the head when his mother felt that he deserved it. He knew that his parents loved him, that had never ever been up for debate. His father was soft-spoken and gentle whereas his mother was loud and brash. He could recall when he was little being convinced that there was a monster under his bed. He was convinced that the monster had a particular taste for young human boys, specifically the blonde human boy who lived in the bed above it. He was convinced that if he was alone in his bedroom at night that the monster would take the opportunity to pounce and feast on the young Bakugo. After bringing up his fear and asking both parents how to get rid of monster, he received two very different responses. His father told him that maybe his monster was hungry for something other than human boys and maybe his monster would settle for a different midnight snack such as sweet fruit or a piece of candy. Katsuki decided that it was worth a try after realizing that he had not actually asked what the monster was craving, and every night for a week straight he would leave a small plate of whatever snack he could find next to his bed. Every morning following he would check the plate and found only crumbs left behind. At first the revelation made the boy feel a little better, knowing that the monster that he was rooming with was willing to compromise and eat human food, but soon enough he started to once again dread sleeping in his bed. Katsuki figured that the only reason he was not being eaten at night was because he was offering something else. But what if one night he forgot to put out an offering? What if one night the monster decided that he no longer liked apples and thought that the blonde smelled rather tasty? Once again the boy felt unsafe within his home. His mother had suggested to scare the monster away. At first Katsuki thought that the idea was crazy because how could he intimidate a monster with sharp teeth and large claws? But his mother promised that if the young blonde pretended to be scary before bed that the monster would believe him. With no other options, the little boy found himself marching around his bedroom at 7 p.m. with his toy baseball bat while yelling threats to the monster that dare take refuge under his bed. After his quirk developed at the tender age of 3.5, he found himself shoving his hands under the bed and letting off tiny warning explosions to show the monster that Katsuki had greater power. That if the monster dare challenge the blonde, it would be Katsuki that left unscathed, victorious. From then on, it was obvious to the blonde, the only way to get what he wants, the only way to keep himself safe is to make sure that he is the strongest one in the room. The only proper way to show his strength was through his quirk, and maybe if that didn't work, Katsuki would be willing to swing a punch or two, no doubt accompanied by some sort of insult hurled at his opponent. It was then that he decided actions spoke louder than words. At least, his actions spoke louder than words. Katsuki knew that he was not like other children. He saw how other kids would talk to one another, how they would play with each other, how a certain green-haired boy cried whenever he was sad, which apparently was quite often. The blonde envied how other children easily were able to voice their opinions without raising their fists. He wished that he could cry when he scraped his knee or when someone else was using the color crayon that he was waiting for. But that would make him weak, and Katsuki knew that he had to be strong. Safety equaled strength. The blonde figured that crying was the largest sign of weakness. If others knew he was hurt, Katsuki had a feeling that they would be able to use it against him. He was only trying to survive. There was always a certain green-haired kid who he was rather worried for, Midoriya Izuku. They had been friends before the blonde had found out about another weakness in his companion. It was already enough that Katsuki had to deal with Izuku's constant display of emotions, the ever-flowing river of tears that seemed to leak out of those green eyes, the ones that the blonde wished he could shed as well. Katsuki was having a hard enough time trying to keep them both safe before he found out that Izuku was even more weak than he originally thought. Quirkless. His companion, his supposed future hero partner, was quirkless. Utterly defenseless. No monster could ever make him fear anything as much as he feared for the safety of his friend. Midoriya Izuku would never be strong. Midoriya Izuku would always be weak. Bakogu Katsuki decides from that day on he could no longer associate with his best friend. The blonde would not be able to protect him. Katsuki had his sights set on the number 1 hero slot. His dream to surpass All Might was still on the forefront of his mind. The number 1 hero held a dangerous job. Katsuki knew that once he held that title, those that he held close would be in more danger than ever before, and he knew that if he kept that little green-haired boy around, that there was no way he would survive. The green-haired boy was weak. The blonde-haired boy would never be strong enough to protect him. Katsuki convinced himself for years that he was better, stronger, without the green-eyed boy. The further away from the boy, the better. Midoriya Izuku would never be strong enough to protect himself, and Katsuki, no matter how hard he tried, would never be strong enough for the both of them. Years went by filled with insults and injuries that he would inflict on the green-haired boy, the blonde urging the other to go away, urging the other to save yourself. Deep down, Katsuki knew that what he was doing most likely was wrong. He knew that his words hurt his old friend and that Izuku wished to be close with him again. Katsuki knew that he could not keep tearing down the green-haired boy for much longer. The blonde thanked whatever gods that may be out there when he received his acceptance letter to his high school, his dream school, his Izuku's dream school. Only, he knew that his friend would not be accompanying him and he would finally be free, and maybe Izuku would finally be safe. Bakugo Katsuki knew that he was not like other teenagers. He knew that he still wasn't able to convey how he was feeling towards others, no matter how much he wanted to. The blonde doubted he would ever be able to tell Shitty Hair how much he appreciates his friendship, let alone admit that they have won it all. He doubted that he would ever be able to tell Deku, Izuku, how sorry he was. How silly he felt thinking that the green-haired boy he grew up with was weak and defenseless, because after seeing him up close using that quirk, Katsuki was convinced that he was anything but. Katsuki was convinced that Midoriya Izuku was strong, and maybe he was never weak, and maybe that scared him. Scratch that. Katsuki was definitely scared of Izuku's strength, and maybe he was even more afraid of the lengths that the green-haired boy would go to use it. The snapping and cracking of his childhood best friend's bones lurked within the blonde's dreams more often than he would care to admit. The purple hue of the green-eyed boy's skin as he willingly tears himself apart haunted the red-eyed boy's nightmares. The death of his childhood friend, his hope to be a friend once more, scared the blonde more than any monster ever could. Maybe that's what led to this point. Maybe the snapping of bones echoed within his mind a little too loud that night, and maybe the nerd died in the blonde's dream, and maybe Katsuki was standing outside the green-haired boy's room because for some reason he had to make sure that Deku, Izuku, was still alive. His knuckles knocked on the door in front of him before he could remind them not to. Before he could convince himself to head back to his own bed and allow himself to try to threaten whatever monsters lurked within his subconscious. Before he could convince himself to hightail it out of that hallway, the door had already opened and the green-haired boy stood in front of the blonde. "Oh, Kakin, what are you doing here? It's 2 in the morning and you're usually asleep by 8:30, aren't you?" Green eyes looked at him, heavily weighted down by sleep or maybe lack thereof. Katsuki willed himself to say something, anything, but found that his throat had dried up and that his eyes decided that now was the time to release its pent-up dam. So here stood Katsuki, Lord Explosion Murder, and the only thing he could manage to say was, "You're alive," over and over again. Hoping that maybe if he spoke it enough that he could convince himself that it was really the green-haired nerd in front of him and that he wasn't dead and that Katsuki, despite what he had told himself years ago, was actually able to protect them both. Actions spoke louder than words. Katsuki knew that his actions spoke louder than any other thing he could ever say to the green-haired boy. The blonde teen's arms found their way around the smaller green-eyed boy and his lips found their way to the hairline of the smaller one's head. Over and over again. They held some sort of message, one that even the red-eyed boy didn't understand, but he hoped that maybe Izuku would be able to decode what Katsuki wanted to say. His green-haired friend has always had a better way. With words. One thing that Kaminari knew for certain was that he had never been the sharpest knife or the brightest bulb around. Sure, he didn't necessarily think he was dumb, but he liked to think that he had a healthy understanding of self-awareness. Despite what others may think. He knew from a young age that he had to work harder than most people to reach the grades that he hoped for. At first, the blonde would spend hours holed up in his room studying, and studying, and studying until he felt that he physically could not cram any more information into his little electrical brain. Some nights he would feel a dull throbbing in his hand from writing and rewriting his notes. Other nights he'd camp out at his desk in his bedroom and work on math equations until he quite literally short-circuited. It started in elementary school. Kaminari would get called on to read aloud in front of the class, and he would stumble over his words. Sometimes taking twice as long as the other students needed just to be able to choke out a single paragraph from his textbook. It was a wonder to him how anyone could get any work done with how the words seemed to swim across his pages. Letters like W's and M's liked to switch with each other mid-sentence while he read. Soon enough his teachers started calling on him less and less. Maybe they felt that they were doing the blonde boy a favor, but it only served to make him feel even more confused. As time went on, less teachers tried to explain passages or go over homework with him. Some even going as far as telling him that he was a lost cause and that he should spend more time reading alone. Kaminari realized that if academics wasn't going to be his strong suit, then he needed something else to make him stand out. He needed something for other people to focus on so that he wouldn't get made fun of. Pretty quickly afterwards, he decided that maybe if he could get people to laugh with him, then they would stop laughing at him. For the most part, his plan had worked. He started spending less time at his desk and more time with his peers. He found that the more he joked around and made himself known as the self-proclaimed class clown, the more people he attracted. Middle school was a turning point for the blonde boy. He started making friends who he thought would stick around for a while, who he felt genuinely enjoyed his company. Kaminari finally felt that he was fitting in. He also felt just as lonely because in the back of his mind he was still confused as to why he felt the need to hide. The electric kid never quite felt at ease with others, especially while discussing grades or plans for high school. Often when he would mention that he would be applying to UDA, people would giggle and mention that while he does have a cool quirk, he still needed the grades to pass the written portion of the exam. During his third and last year of middle school, he found himself talking with his mother about his worries. How he was scared that he wasn't good enough. How he was nervous that he would never be smart enough. How no matter how hard he tried he never could catch all the letters that ran away on the page. How he couldn't explain the reason why he still struggled at differentiating his left from his right. How he felt like he was the only one struggling. Tears streamed down his pale face, every once in a while leaving behind a slight sizzle as remnants of his quirk started to show. After hearing just how much her child was struggling, Kaminari's mother scheduled an appointment with his doctor. Listing off details on his study habits and other happenings of his school life to the professional, the blonde was finally given some clarity. Dyslexia. That's what his doctor had told him. Kaminari wasn't stupid or dumb or lazy or even a lost cause. He was just a boy who finally understood why he was having trouble. He could work with having a diagnosis because at least he knew he wasn't the only one. Someone somewhere was having the exact same trouble as he does, and another person somewhere, even though they struggle with his same issues, had found a way to overcome them. The blonde had found a new spark. He noticed that reading off of a screen was easier for him, so with special permission from his school he was able to use a tablet to download textbooks for his classes. He was allotted extra time for tests and exams that were given to him on paper after his teachers were informed. Finally, he wasn't so alone. However, just because he now knew why he was having issues didn't mean that they all were solved. Once again the boy found himself sat at his desk, trying to catch up on work that he never could fully understand. He took countless mock exams and made flashcards to test himself further. He wrote and rewrote words that he felt he had the most trouble with, in hopes that sheer muscle memory could get him through a time crunch essay if needed. Eventually, he started to see less disappointment in his teacher's eyes, less judgment, less pity for the boy who was deemed hardly literate just the year before. While his grades improved greatly, Kaminari still was no genius. Still, after studying and studying some more, he never would find himself reaching over the score of a simple B on his assignments. He would still be fairly happy with his grade. He was content knowing that it really was just his intellect holding him back now that he had found a few ways to counteract his dyslexia. He could live with not being the smartest. He could live with understanding himself even if he still wasn't completely happy with who he was. To the astonishment of those around him, the boy with the electrical quirk had passed the exam. He would be allowed to attend UA. He would get his chance of becoming a hero. People flocked to him even more now that they felt he would actually grow to be somebody important. The blonde found himself swarmed with "Don't forget us when you're famous," and people claiming to have known he was destined for greatness since he was small. Though he knew that it wasn't true, people didn't really believe in him. He soaked up the praise anyway, enjoying the acceptance that he had earned. To be frank, Kaminari thought that the hard part was over. He thought that once he made it into his dream school that it would be smooth sailing after. Sure, he knew he would have to study, and honestly he wasn't really too bummed about it. He had grown used to being cooped up at his desk by now and had developed a rather slow study routine. Every other day he would crack his online textbook for roughly 2 to 3 hours to look over notes and do homework. What he hadn't expected was for his workload to double. He had an inkling of a feeling that high school would be a bit harder than middle school, but he thought classes would mostly be focused on fighting villains and saving lives. Kaminari never really thought about the regular aspects of high school that tag along with the hero aspects, and soon enough he found himself drowning in armfuls of homework each night. Finding a study partner was one thing that the blonde decided was crucial. If he could find someone willing to put up with him, then they not only could bounce ideas off of each other and help out while studying, but he felt it was a surefire way to make connections. The first person who he sought out was a bubbly redhead with sharp teeth, but soon after he found that the red-haired boy named Kirishima seemed just as troubled as he was. The next was their class president, Ida, which quickly backfired because while Ida was a very smart and willing study partner, Kaminari felt as though the engine-quirked boy was light years ahead of him and would explain things much too quickly for Kaminari. Bakugo quickly shut the door in his face when he asked to hang out. Mina was only slightly better than Kirishima but not really enough to help the blonde. Finally he found himself standing in front of a certain green-haired boy's dorm room. Midoriya Izuku was not someone who the blonde would consider intimidating from a distance. Sure, the guy was buff as sheet, but honestly he looked soft and slightly animal-like. Kaminari felt that the anxious tendencies and slight muttering that Midoriya had going on was very rabbit-like. He always felt that the green-eyed boy was on edge, skittish in a way where he was always ready to run. Which he did. All the time. The blonde soon found out that his classmate would run and rush into the first sign of danger if it meant that he could help someone. It certainly wasn't the looks of the boy that intimidated Kaminari. It was his intellect and sheer determination that made the blonde's fist shake as he lightly knocked on the door in front of him. A quick conversation was all it took to convince Midoriya to take him as a study partner. He wondered why the green-haired boy was so eager to help out. It wasn't a secret that Midoriya, or Deku as Bakuga dubbed him, was one of the smartest in class. Kaminari could recall that Midoriya was consistently in the top 3 scores in all their classes. He could also recall that on the rare occasion that he could actually decipher the mumbling that tumbled out of the short boy's mouth, that he would be rambling and analyzing hero fights or fellow classmates. His brain never seemed to stop. So it only made sense that before their first study session the lightning bolt blonde was a bit nervous. Midoriya was a godsend. Kaminari was completely sure that the small green boy was the sole reason why he was passing most of his classes. Deku was the absolute best teacher. He didn't care that the blonde had dyslexia. He didn't care that the blonde needed things explained to him multiple times and often in multiple different ways. He never raised his voice or even seemed annoyed when the blonde asked him to go over something that they had already covered in a previous session. He never made the blonde feel stupid. He always encouraged the blonde when he finally would grasp a concept. He always rewarded the blonde with a tight hug when presented the slowly climbing grades of his friend. All in all, Midoriya Izuku was exactly what Kaminari Denki needed. The blonde was extremely excited for his upcoming study session with his friend whom he was steadily growing closer to. They had spent hours upon hours working on their respective projects for class. A simple essay describing the hero that influenced them the most. While Midoriya's pick came as a shock to no one, his All Might essay was over 20 pages and was single-spaced. They were not required to present their essays. For this, Kaminari thanked whatever deity may reside above him for sparing him the embarrassment, so Midoriya had no clue who his study partner chose. Little did he know that Hero Deku had already made quite the impression. Kaminari couldn't help but write a 5-page essay on his classmate, Izuku Midoriya, depicting not only the academic influence that the hero had had on him but also the emotional one. The constant support that Midoriya gave him. The blonde genuinely felt that he was a better person because of Deku. His friend pushed him to be the very best that he could be. Kaminari planned on leaving the essay with Midoriya so that he could see the influence that he was already making. Yeah, the electrical blonde was rather nervous to put his gratitude out in the open, but he knew for certain that the Geonette would never think anything low of him. The next day was something that Kaminari would remember for quite a while. The previous night he had chickened out about delivering his essay to Midoriya. Instead he decided to wait until midnight to slip it under the green-eyed boy's door for him to find in the morning. When the sun finally rose the next day, the blonde was not expecting to be woken up by soft knocks from his door. Once it was opened, it released a teary-eyed Izuku Midoriya decked out in his All Might pajama set. The next events happened fast but left the blonde in a daze. Midoriya had flung himself at Kaminari as soon as the door allowed him to. The hug was tight, warm, and welcoming. A slew of jumbled words sped out of the smaller boy's mouth as his tears began to dampen the blonde's shirt. Kaminari found one of his hands clutching Midoriya close while the other held the greenette's head to his chest. Kaminari tried his hardest to listen to his friend but found that Midoriya was not stopping anytime soon. Instead of answering the boy with words, Kaminari started peppering the smaller boy's curly hair with feather-light kisses and eventually moved on to whispering, "Thank you, I meant every word, and, I don't mind that my shirt is wet," in his ear. Repeating each one more times than he could care to count. Maybe Kaminari wasn't the sharpest knife or the brightest bulb around, but it didn't really matter. Not when he had his friend to help tutor him along the way. His hero, Death. Midoriya Izuku has many reasons to smile. Long ago he had decided to thank the lucky stars twice a day for blessing him with such reasons. In the morning directly after the green-haired boy wakes up, he goes through his list of people who he knows cares about him and thanks the heavens above for sending them his way. Every night he does the same. Sometimes the list changes. Sometimes when he wakes up he has many people listed, and sometimes that night when he goes to bed he only thanks a few, not because he was no longer thankful for their existence but because he felt they no longer cared for him. When he was young he used to thank his lucky stars for many things. He would express thanks for his family, friends, and even teachers. It didn't take long for him to start asking those stars above why so many of the people that he was thankful for decided to leave him. Midoriya Izuku loved his father, and if he were honest the probability of him saying that he still cared for him was high. Even after Midoriya Hisashi left his family, left Izuku when the boy turned the tender age of 4. When the only male adult figure that Izuku had known decided to walk out of his life after announcing that his son no longer deserved affection. Not when he was quirkless. Hisashi did not care for quirkless people. Midoriya Izuku loved Bakugo Katsuki, and if he were honest the probability of him saying that he still cared for him was high. They had grown up together hand in hand while pretending to fight crime in the name of justice. Izuku loved his Kaken. He loved that his Kaken always made sure that he got to be the sidekick while Kaken was the hero. Even when other kids would come and ask to play with them, the blonde boy insisted that the green-haired boy would be the only one who could possibly stand at his side. Izuku loved his best friend. Even after his best friend developed his quirk, after his best friend named him Deku, after his best friend told him to kill himself, Izuku knew that Kaken did not love him, did not care for Deku. Katsuki did not care for quirkless people. Midoriya Izuku loved school, and if he were honest the probability of him saying that he still cared about education was high. Even after his teachers told him that he was cheating when he scored higher than most students during assessments. Even after teachers turned a blind eye and sometimes joined in on the bullying that happened on school grounds. Even after most teachers had told him to give up, to not apply to UA, to not apply to high school at all. Even after his teacher told him that he had no potential. Principals, teachers, and adults don't care for quirkless people. Midoriya Izuku had one person who he consistently thanked the heavens for, and that was his mother, Midoriya Inko. For some reason that the green child couldn't understand, his mother cared about quirkless people, cared about him. So he decided that he would thank his lucky stars for the woman who loved him with all that he could. He stopped thanking for Hisashi, Kaken, his teachers, and started using that energy for his mother. Years passed by where Izuku continued with his morning and late-night ritual with only one name on his list. He didn't mind, he still cared for his friends when he finally gained his quirk and was able to make some, and wanted them to have the best life possible, but he didn't think that they truly cared for him. How could they? Deep down his quirk was artificial, deep down he would always be Deku, deep down he would always be quirkless. No one other than his mother cares about quirkless people. After the sports festival, the freckled boy felt some sort of connection to the pale lavender-haired boy that he faced up against during his first match of the final round. For some reason Izuku felt the need to befriend and care for him. Which to be fair was not an odd thing for the smaller green-haired fellow who seemed to adopt friends left and right. Izuku knew that he had many friends and that he was somewhat good at convincing people to spend time with him, but he also felt that they were hanging around with him because of convenience. Uraraka only befriended him because he saved her, Ida only befriended him because he was a good class president, and Todoroki only befriended him because the smaller boy knew the secret of the bicolored boy's family. Shinso only befriended him because Izuku wasn't afraid of the sleep-deprived boy's quirk. He knew that they didn't truly care about him. He knew that his lucky stars had not sent them to him, and that when the time came they too would admit that they truly had not cared for him. Just like most people did. Shinso Hitoshi found himself surrounded by Class 1A for the second time. The first was when his friend, Midoriya Izuku, had introduced him to the rest of the class, rambling about how cool his quirk was and that it was almost inevitable that he would transfer into the hero course. The doe-eyed boy had insisted that Shinso get to know all of these people because he would eventually have to work with them during his quote, very heroic future. Now the lavender boy was sitting in the common room when people who he thought he could possibly make friends with were fast asleep after watching a movie of two together. Shinso was invited by Midoriya to spend the night at the dorm, claiming that he had already gotten permission from Aizawa to do so. Reminded of his smaller friend, Shinso took a look around the room to see if he could find the bush-like hair of who he would consider his best friend. He found that said boy's sleeping bag was empty and he could faintly hear footsteps coming from the direction of the door leading to the outside of the dorms. He assumed that Midoriya was heading for a midnight stroll and decided that he may as well join him. Slowly Shinso cracked open the door and was greeted by a cool breeze and quiet murmuring. "It's me again. I just wanted to thank you for my mother and hope that you bless her for always caring for me." The tall male found Midoriya on his knees, eyes closed, hands clasped together, with his face tilted towards the sky. "I know that it must be hard on you to make her care for me for so long, but please let her continue with the struggle. I know how hard it is for you to convince her that I'm still worthy of her care, but I can't have her leave too, and I really need her to care about me even if it's just a little tiny bit." Shinso knew what prayer was, he knew what it looked like, he knew what most people probably prayed for. Most people asked and begged for money, success, health, and maybe even guidance, but Shinso had never witnessed anyone else ever plead for their mother not to give up on them. "My list is the same as always," Midoriya continued. "I only have one name on it. Please bless Midoriya Inko for caring for a Deku like me." Shinso had thought that Midoriya Izuku had always had many reasons to smile. He had assumed that since the Greenette usually had someone hanging off his arms talking to him that he had a close bond with most people. The purple boy thought that Midoriya had grown up with assurance that he would be important in the future, that he had always had people rooting for him and investing in him, caring about him. On his way back to his sleeping bag in hopes on not being caught snooping in on his friend's obviously personal prayer, Shinso hoped that someday Midoriya would add him to the prayer. Not because he wanted the boy to wish Shinso a bright future, he already knew that Midoriya believed in him and truly cared about his well-being, but because it seemed to the sleepy teen that Midoriya only prayed for those who he thought loved him, cared for him. Shinso heard how people talked about the green bean of 1A. How they quite literally adored the ground that he walked on. He could never tune out the chatter of the amazing feats that Midoriya accomplished in class, how kind the boy was, how selfless the boy was, and more oftentimes how blinding his smile was. Shinso wondered how many of those smiles were based off of one reason, to make others feel better. Never because the Greenette was happy himself. A few weeks passed by with the same tune. Izuku would wake up, pray, go to school, study, clean up, pray, and then sleep. The cycle continued like usual until on night he heard a quiet knock on his door. A short tapping. "I hope you haven't started yet." There stood Shinso Hitoshi with a couple sheets of paper in his hand with names that seemed hastily scrawled on them. "I've made a list, well, not just me, but it was my idea. They all signed because they wanted to, and I guess they wanted you to know too." Wadash. Midoriya tried to question his friend but was quickly cut off. "Just read it and talk to me when you can." Shinso turned to walk away before he changed his mind, quickly turning around and pulling his friend into a tight hug. He gave his smaller friend a light kiss on the side of his neck during the embrace before whispering that he wanted Midoriya to believe whatever was on the paper before letting go and vacating the room. Confused, the boy silently took a look at what was written. There was a large heading on the top of the page of notebook paper labeled, "People Who Love You." Midoriya read and reread the list over and over that night, and for the first time on a long time, went to sleep with more names at night than he had that morning to thank his lucky stars for. Repetition is a funny thing. Some things just become ingrained in your system after many years of doing it, to the point where you no longer have to think about it. Examples include a certain morning routine, driving a car, how to make your favorite meal, or if you're Azui Tsuyu, it could be drinking tea and tucking her siblings in before bed. It quickly became common knowledge throughout Class 1A that Azui, or Tsu as she insisted being called, was rather mature for her age. However, some uncommon knowledge was that her maturity developed through the need to grow up at an accelerated rate. Both of her parents worked long hours to be able to support her family, which meant that during these long hours, Tsu would be in charge of her two younger siblings. In charge of the meals, in charge of them doing their homework, in charge of their night routine. She learned to change a diaper at the age of 10, and she learned that in order to get all of her schoolwork done on time, she had to stay up rather late after she put her siblings to bed. Habits are a hard thing to break. Now that the dorm system for U.A was up and running, Tsu had found herself in a predicament. Just because she no longer was at home, did not mean that she had broken her nighttime routine. Every night when everyone heads for bed per Ida-chan's request, Tsu heads to her room and does her homework. Afterwards, she makes herself some tea and then checks the common room for her friends. She never actually expects her friends to be awake or really expects anyone to be there, but on the slight chance that there is a straggler, she wants to take care of them. She has a system. One that has been fine-tuned over the few months that she has been living with her new family filled with classmates. Depending on who was on the sofa, she would either wake them up and accompany them to their bedroom, or she would just grab one of the blankets laying around the room and tuck them in. Ida, Bakugo, Todoroki, Yaoyorozu, and a couple others preferred to be woken up and sent to their room. Bakugo in particular would be very strict on her, knowing that he never fell asleep and that he didn't need a no-good Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle wannabe to help him to his room. But the slight pink on his cheeks let Tsu know that he appreciated the gesture somewhere deep down. Uraraka, Kirishima, Ashido, Koda, and a few other preferred to be tucked in with a few blankets and left on the couch to snuggle. The only classmate that she had yet to figure out was her fellow green-haired friend, Midoriya. Midoriya was an enigma to many people. A mystery to be solved, but when you put a puzzle piece in place, others seem to come undone, leaving you with an unfinished picture of a person and a feeling of disappointment. Not that Tsu was ever disappointed with her friend. Not Midoriya Izuku. Not the boy who gave everything he had for his friends, not the boy who studied with the students that needed extra help just so that he could show them over and over again what the quadratic equation is and the little song that he sings to help him remember it, not the boy with the analytical mind of a genius but the social instincts of a kicked puppy. Never would she be disappointed in Midoriya. Tsu was disappointed in the fact that even though Midoriya seemed to find a way to care for every single one of his classmates in his own special sunshine broccoli way, she seemed unsure of how to care for him. Tsu had tried both to wake him up and to tuck him into the sofa, and both ended with him apologizing repeatedly with a red enough face that he looked like he had turned into a sunshine strawberry. Which was cute, but Tsu knew that he was embarrassed. Out of everyone in her class, Midoriya was who Tsu felt needed the most caring for. Instinctually, she felt the need to provide a loving hand to hold and a soft embrace for him to fall into when times got tough. Boy, did times get tough for Midoriya Izuku. Whether it was him shattering his body during training, the stain incident, the Kamino incident, or the Eri incident, Tsu wanted to be there for him. There was never a time where Tsu felt so protective over Midoriya than when he had confided in her of his family situation. On the surface, Midoriya always talked about his home life in a positive way. He loved his mother and looked up to her for working and providing for him in the absence of his father. But Tsu knew the toll it had most likely taken out of him. 1A had already figured out that Izuku was a late bloomer and hadn't made many friends or maybe any at all during middle school. A lonely experience it must have been, Tsu decided. Even lonelier when her friend went home every day for his mother to still be at work until dark, for him to eat his meals in silence after packing up his mother's portion of the meal he made for her to eat when she got home, only having the videos of heroes as company in his quiet house. It was no wonder to Tsu why he was such an All Might fanboy. It was because All Might had unknowingly kept him company throughout his childhood. Midoriya's house was never quiet when his videos played. For those short 10 minutes of each video, he felt a little less alone and a little less afraid of the years he felt he would endure this lonely void in his heart. Midoriya one day told Tsu late at night that he had never felt more alone than when he was at his home. He told her that he was bullied at school, but at least they would talk to him when they called him names, at least they would look at him when they glared at him, and at least he could pretend that the hands that were grabbing him were touches of love. He confided in the fact that he knew his mother loved him and that he returned the same affections, but he also knew deep down that they didn't know each other anymore. He talked about how he wasn't the only lonely one and that his mother must have felt the same way with her coworkers who he knew thought of her fondly. She felt comfort in their words, so Midoriya sought to never take that away. He didn't speak up about his bullies, he didn't complain or ask for anything, and he certainly did not inform his mother of when she got his birthday wrong. He didn't get mad when she bought him red shoes claiming that they were his favorite color when he actually preferred blues and purples. He didn't get mad when she picked up as many shifts as possible. Oftentimes she'd try to work 7 days a week until one of her coworkers would remind her that she had a child at home who would probably want to see her. To that she would laugh and tell the story to her son when she got home, and after such a story there would be a pause. Neither party would know how to continue the conversation, and Inko would retreat to her bedroom so that neither would have to endure the tension in the air. Azui too came to realize that Midoriya Izuku had never been taken care of, coddled, or spoiled. Not that she had the means to do any of the spoiling, but she did have the means to care for him. She had the means to be the first one in a long time, to her knowledge, to try and care for him. She had to be discreet, for if her friend knew that she may slightly be inconveniencing herself, that he would feel troubled. She had to make her care look like she was doing it for her sake, and maybe she was. Maybe she missed making meals for her siblings, checking their homework and tucking them in with a whisper of love and affirmation in their ears. "I love you, change the world," she'd say before bed, as her mother had done to her for many years. So her plan of action began. Slow at first. She would make herself dinner and have it be much larger than a single portion. Such dinner would happen around the time she knew Midoriya would be getting back from his evening run, where he was always a bit famished after. She would insist that she made too much and wanted his company. Who was he to deny her? She would start studying in the common room when she knew that Midoriya had his study hours with his friends that needed extra help, and would ask if she could join. She hoped to be of use to helping others so that Midoriya could do his own work for a change. She started making an extra cup of tea because she knew 4 out of the 7 nights a week that Midoriya had nightmares and would come downstairs for a change in scenery. She would offer him the cup and say that she brewed too much, and then she would accompany him to his door, wishing him a better night's rest. Days, weeks, and a month or 2 went by according to this schedule until Midoriya had invited her up to his room to drink their tea and watch a few videos on a newly debuted hero who he felt had a similar fighting style as Tsu. It was late into the night, or perhaps early into the morning, when Tsu noticed that her friend was passed out on his bed next to her. Her mouth twitched into a small smile as she tucked him under his all-might sheets and ran her hand through his curly hair. That night she whispered in his ear all the things that she admired about him and what she hoped to learn with him. She whispered how much he inspired her and how she couldn't wait to watch more videos with him. She crept as quietly as she could towards the door before changing her mind and once again leaning down towards her passed-out friend to speak in a hushed tone. "We all love you, you'll change the world, I just know it." After a small feather-light kiss was delivered to his ear, she left his room silently. If every so often she ended up watching videos with her green-haired sunshine friend late at night and early into the morning until he fell asleep, if she then would whisper all the things she wished she could say out loud to him when he was awake, if she gave him a kiss on his little ear as punctuation, well, that was just something that no one else had to know about. Much like other girls, Uraraka Achiko liked cute things. She would say that she loved cute things, which isn't anything out of the norm for high school girls, and it wasn't much of a surprise to the rest of her classmates when she started to cling with one very cute boy, Midoriya Izuku. From the first time that the brunette laid eyes on the green-haired boy, she knew that they would get along. She could picture herself falling in love with those squishable chubby cheeks. His curly ringlets would bounce upon his head as he practically pranced around the halls, excitement evident in his every step. It was like he was simply floating on cloud 9 while at UA. She found herself on many occasions inching nearer and nearer to the green hair that attracted her attention with the sole purpose to just ruffle it. One thing that she knew about cute things was that they were easily broken. When she was a young girl, Uraraka had a pet cat, probably a kitten if she were honest. She couldn't possibly know for sure, seeing as though the cat wasn't exactly hers. It lived outside her home and visited a few times a week, but the brunette had fallen in love with the creature and even named it Sugar Bean. A cute name for a cute cat that she had claimed ownership of, unofficially. Diligently, she would set table scraps outside in a small hand-painted bowl that she decorated herself and would wait for Sugar Bean to visit. She would slide and whisper sweet nothings in the kitten's ear, but never once dared to let the animal inside her home. Cammy knows how her parents would have reacted. They would have never let her keep another being in the home when they themselves were just scraping by. They had enough mouths to feed. Months went by with her and her feline friend falling into a new normalcy between the two of them. Uraraka found that the kitten would visit in the evenings around thrice a week, and the kitten knew that when they came they would be fed. It wasn't until that cycle was broken that the young girl realized her mistake. A few days had gone by without her kitten visiting her, including one of the days that the kitten usually would have turned up at her home. On her way to school, the brunette stumbled upon the carcass of her beloved pet. Tufts of fur were missing and the animal's blood was smeared all over the concrete around it. Older kids, teenagers were who she suspected attacked her kitten. Her cute little kitten was fragile and broken and dead. She could have saved that kitten. She should have saved that kitten. She failed that kitten. Uraraka Achiko loved cute things with a passion, and Deku's freckles painted his face like it had been kissed by the solar system, and the stars decided to make their home on his cheeks. No one could deny the adorable factor that the boy had. She had learned from her mistake with Sugar Bean. She vowed not to let anything happen to Midoriya Izuku. The brunette wanted the greenette to smile like the sun shone out of his teeth forever and was willing to do whatever was necessary to make sure it stayed that way. At first it was small things such as sending him smiles, talking with him between class PRDS and at lunch. She also found herself sitting next to him on public transportation while heading home from school. Her protectiveness only grew larger and larger as she watched the boy tear himself apart. It was inevitable that he would break. Her friend was made of glass. He was a mosaic, beautiful in every way but easily torn apart and shattered. She watched as his own quirks snapped his limbs. She watched as he willingly threw himself in the line of fire. She watched while once again not being able to save a friend. She hated herself for it. Uraraka found that with each hospital visit that she paid to her cute friend, she grew more and more anxious. He refused to protect himself. The brunette thought that he had more brains than what he fought with. Not to insult his intellect, Midoriya was actually one of the smartest people she had met, yet he could not figure out how to save himself. Not that he would ever have to, she would be there to protect him. When Bakugo decides to throw insults and odd quirkless slurs, for whatever reason she couldn't understand, she would be there defending him. Midoriya was too sweet to ever say anything mean to his dear Kaken, but she wasn't. Uraraka would counter the blonde's attacks with her own sharp tongue, only going too far once or twice when she mentioned that the reason for his bad attitude was that he was compensating for his tool down below. She enjoyed the power that she felt, the strength that she had when Midoriya would look at her later on and thank her for being his friend. His eyes would grow impossibly large and wet while he squeezed her into a tight hug. She liked being the one to stick up for Deku. The girl was his first friend and Yudere, and probably his first real friend ever. Considering how Bakugo treats the greenette, Uraraka doesn't think they were ever truly friends. She had first dibs on the short boy, which is why she could feel herself growing a little more jealous each day with how close others started to get to her friend. Her best friend. It was unfair. She was the one who noticed Midoriya first. Why did he feel the need to make more friends when Uraraka was willing to do whatever it takes for him to stay safe? How dare he throw his life away for Todoroki during the sports festival? They had hardly even known each other. In fact, she seemed to remember when that very same day a certain half-hot half-cold student insulted her friend. What made Todoroki so special that the boy she wanted to protect would be willing to undo all her hard work? Apparently he wasn't special. There must have been a memo that she missed where Midoriya explained that he would be willing to die for just about anyone. How did she know that? Well, it's simple. He decided to go to Hosu. Midoriya Izuku went to Hosu and fought Stain, the hero killer, which her friend conveniently forgets to mention anytime he's asked, only to be saved by someone who wasn't her. He fought a serial killer for Ida, the boy who she later found out berated her adorable friend for his adorable habit that was mostly out of his control. So yeah, she was a little set off a lot of the time recently. If that wasn't enough, her trouble magnet friend also decided to take on the Yakuza. That's right, her friend took on Overhaul and won. She wasn't an idiot. Uraraka knew that her friend was very strong, physically. She would suppose that in a few years he might become unbeatable. The brunette knew that in a one-on-one fight her friend could demolish almost any opponent with a flick of his fingers. It didn't help that currently his finger were broken from a sparring match he had against Kirishima during class. Recovery Girl decided to let him go a full day with the broken fingers before she would heal Midoriya, as a way to punish him and hopefully break him out of his self-destructive habits. Physically, he could be unstoppable. His mentality was what got him in trouble. Deku, her selfless hero Deku, had a nasty habit of not caring for himself. It wasn't always obvious to Uraraka. She thought that the boy was just a bit anxious and that made him make mistakes every once in a while. Little things like forgetting his lunch at home or giving away pencils to people who asked him for one didn't seem like such a bad thing. Until she found out that he wasn't forgetting his lunch, that he would give it to someone else if he thought they would like what he was having more. Until she found out that he would never ask for the pencils that he lent out to others and would just let them keep the tool. Which wouldn't be a big deal if he made sure to keep at least one for himself, but she knew that wasn't the case. If asked for his last pencil, he gave it to someone else. If asked for the shirt off his back, he would give it to a stranger, then tell the stranger that it looked better on them than it did on Midoriya. Which would be utterly false because the greenette looks delectable on almost anything he wore. Uraraka noticed that her friend didn't stop at doing small things for people either. He was selfless and careless about himself to the point where she knew her friend would get himself killed. It was inevitable that he would shatter and Uraraka would not be able to put his pieces back together again. Uraraka Ochako felt that she was fairly good at puzzles. That is, as long as she could see the top of the box that showed what her puzzle was supposed to look like. When it came to her friend, she had no clue what his jigsaw was supposed to be, and that gave her a hard time when she tried to fix his pieces together. Midoriya has secrets. The brunette wouldn't push too hard because everyone was entitled to their own privacy, but she found that her friend kept much of his life to himself. He never mentioned his father, he never really mentioned much of his life before high school, and he never mentioned how he feels most of the time. Sure, he basically cries on command, and if he tried he could probably flood a desert with his tears, but he never really explains why he feels the need to do so. Was he so repressed before that he never let himself cry and now it just flows out of him uncontrollably? Was he just that sad all of the time? Uraraka couldn't tell. What she knew was that she wanted to put him together and see his full picture to understand why he would do these things to himself. Why he makes it so hard for her to protect him. So, she settled on protecting him the only way she knew how. Through affection. The brunette figured that if she showed the boy how much she cares for him, that eventually it might just rub off and he would care for himself. Maybe he could learn to love himself too. She would pinch his cheeks and rub them until they turned pink, which wasn't hard because he couldn't help himself from blushing anytime he received positive attention. She would cuddle him during movies and comb his wet hair after he got out of the shower. She would try not to lecture the boy too much after he injured himself. Instead, she would place delicate kisses over such injuries as her mother would to her when she was little. She'd kiss each and every wound, each and every scar to show that she valued him, each and every blemish to show that she still thought that he was cute with them. Uraraka Ochako loves cute things and hopes that one day Midoriya Izuku will love himself as much as she does. There are some days that are better than others. Which, to be fair, is a well-known fact to most people. No one knows this better than one Midoriya Izuku. Some days the green-haired boy will wake up and get ready for class without a hitch whatsoever. He'll stretch and probably take a quick jog to get his blood pumping before showering and eating a small breakfast. Class would then begin shortly after, and he has the privilege of attending the school of his dreams. Those days he also has the privilege of feeling good. The good days aren't rare per se, but lately they aren't as often as he knows they probably should be. He knows that most of his classmates probably have bad days too. He knows this because he has become a listener of sorts for people when those days happen. He listens when Mina runs out of her favorite eyeshadow palette. He listens when Aoyama happens to have that same problem too. He listens when the Wi-Fi is slow and the Baku squad collectively complains to anyone available. He listens but doesn't say much. Probably because his bad days are different. His bad days start with bad mornings which start with his body aching. Chronic pain was something that he saddled himself with after the sports festival and kept collecting after his many quirk incidents. It started with a pinching sensation occasionally in his fingers that would travel up through his elbow, something that he could easily ignore. He chanted it to himself when he first started noticing the unwanted sensation. Well, unwanted at the time. When his day progresses, so does the sensation in his hand. First it's pinching, then it's pinching and itching, then it's nothing. Numbness. throughout almost his entire arm, he sometimes has little to no feeling. On those days he prays to whatever higher being may be out there that he won't have a heroics class that day. That he won't have to pretend everything's alright while sparring with someone when he doesn't even think he could land a proper hit. It isn't always noticeable. The green-eyed boy had his new shoot style to thank for that. His new technique of kicking allows for him to hide the weakness that follows him around those days. Sort of. Even when his heroics class isn't scheduled during his bad days, he still has regular classes. Regular classes filled with regular assignments that are taught by regular lessons where people with regular arms can take notes easily. Both of his arms have suffered because of his inability to control his borrowed quirk. His good arm violently shakes a lot of the time. His handwriting turns sloppy and almost unreadable. It cramps easily and doesn't seem to want to let him write his notes quick enough before his teacher moves on, and it hurts. It hurts every time he looks at his mangled limbs with scars as accessories that he wears around each and every day. It hurts because he's reminded of how far behind everyone he always is. Which then turns into the hurt that he feels when he remembers why he's so far behind. It hurts when he remembers that deep down he will always be the quirkless, useless Deku. It hurts when he remembers that most of his friends that he's made in high school very well may have bullied him if they had known him just a year prior. The worst days are when he hears murmuring. It isn't always about him, but sometimes he hears people, classmates, talk about quirkless people. It hurts when Ida says that he's glad that Yuri doesn't accept quirkless people because they're too fragile. It hurts when Shinso mentions offhandedly that while he didn't have a great time with a villain's quirk, for a while, he at least had a quirk. It definitely hurt when he heard Mineta mention another quirkless suicide on the news. Of course Midoriya stands up for quirkless people when he hears his classmates say these awful things about these people. His people. But to them it doesn't matter because what does he know? To them, he has always had a strong quirk and has always had the privileges that come with it. To everyone but Kaken, who is always uncharacteristically quiet during those conversations. Those are the days where the short greenette tries to hide. He knows that he has to stay in sight of others or it would tip them off to something being the matter. How could he explain why he was so upset? He couldn't tell them that he miraculously developed a quirk at 14, could he? He certainly could not tell them the truth. So he says nothing after his initial argument. He instead drowns himself in books, hero news, or assignments. He would much rather swim through a sea of hero reports than have to dive into any more quirkless conversations with his quirkist friends. Could he even call them that? Sometimes on those days Kaken would try to talk to him about it, but honestly no. Midoriya does not want to talk about his quirkless issues with one of the main reasons he has those issues, and even though their friendship has moved on, the boy knows that he will never forget the blonde telling him to take a swan dive. He will never forget that if All Might hadn't come around and given him a quirk after already breaking his heart, that he would most likely be dead. So he sits and stews in the self-hatred that he had been accumulating throughout his lifetime and hopes that it won't boil over. It happened one day, on a rather bad day. Midoriya has woken up that day aching before later breaking another 3 fingers later during training. He was physically exhausted. Mentally he was tired too. So very tired of his classmates who were sitting around the television in the common room making fun a sitcom that they were watching. It was the only show that had a quirkless person being portrayed in a light that wasn't fragile. The quirkless character wasn't a regular on the show but was just a minor friend to the main character who had a one-sided crush on them. The boy had already sat through multiple episodes of the show with his classmates before and hadn't even liked it to begin with. Every time he tried to get up to leave the room, someone would call out to him that they either paused the show for him or that he was a stick in the mud for leaving. So now he was physically and emotionally tired. His arms aches and his heart aches and he just wanted to sleep. Honestly, how could anyone expect the viewers to even sympathize with her? Mineta questioned, seemingly genuinely confused about the show. Sympathize with who? A classmate that Midoriya couldn't bother to identify asked. Okay, listen. I get that these shows have to have some type of diversity, right? But do they honestly expect us to root for the quirkless girl to get the guy? It's just unrealistic. It's a well-known fact that quirkless people just don't mesh well with society anyway, so why the hell do they keep putting this girl in the plot line? The purple boy rolled his eyes to punctuate his rant. I mean, I see it too. Kaminari shrugged. I for one am certain that I would not engage with a woman without a quirk simply to make sure that our offspring would not end up the same way. Ida stated. Mineta jumped onto the couch happy to have finally been right about something in the eyes of his class president. See, why do they even have her? They should just kill her off or something. It's not like anyone would miss her. The pot had overflowed, and before Midoriya could stop himself, he found that he was blocking the show. Dude, move out of the way. A sigh made its way past his lips. He really was going to do this. He couldn't take any more of this. Do any of you wonder why I mumble so often? He asked. Silence followed. Maybe you guys haven't thought about it. Doesn't seem like you think of much other than yourselves anyway. Deku, how could you say that to us? We're your friends. Uraraka raises her voice louder than usual and her face was painted red from anger. How could I say that? How can you guys talk about quirkless people like that? What is wrong with you all? You're supposed to be heroes in training, but all of you sound just like we're back in middle school. He looked into each and every one of his classmates' eyes. Once again silence followed. I mumble because I had no one to talk to for a really long time. Midoriya clenched and unclenches his hands at his side. He really was doing this. Kaken is the only one who know this, since he grew up with me and all, but I was diagnosed quirkless at 4. My dad left my mom and I because of it. My classmates hated me, the teachers hated me. Even businesses after they found out about my diagnosis wouldn't allow me to buy from their stores. My mom was the only one who wanted anything to do with me, but because my dad decided to disappear, she didn't have any time to. She picked up as many shifts as possible to pay our bills, and I hardly saw her after that. Babysitters who were willing to look after such a fragile child rarely came around, and if they did, we couldn't afford them. Midori dash. Did I say I was finished? The greenette steeled his gaze at the redhead, willing him to try and interrupt again. I had no one to talk to, so I talked to myself. I told myself everything would be fine when classmates would hit me, use their quirks on me, when they would tell me time and time again to kill myself. His eyes strayed to the explosive blonde in the room for only a split second before he continued. My first death threat came when I was in 4th grade. Some high school, maybe even middle schoolers, decided it would be a fun idea to jump the tiny quirkless kid on the block. My arm was broken in 2 places. I also had bruised ribs, a concussion, and they had tried to slit my throat. One of the guys had a quirk that sharpened his fingernails. He held my neck in both hands and told me all the ways he could kill me in an instant while the others took turns hitting me. The only reason I got away was because the neighbors in the house next door shouted that they were gonna call the police if we didn't all stop yelling. W8 Midoriya, this can't even be true. You have a quirk. One of his classmates tried to reason. Yes, it fucking is. Raccoon eyes. The nerd couldn't go to school for over a week because of it. Bakugu spoke up. Small sparks tickled the palm of his hands. The doctors with healing quirks at the hospital refused to treat me, Midoriya continued, his voice wavering. They said they didn't want to waste their energy on someone like me when there was a chance that a different emergency would come up. I wasn't worth saving. Life went on like this until the day of the entrance exam when somehow I had a quirk. Apparently, my quirk was dormant all my life because I lacked muscle mass. If I had been able to access my quirk before then, I probably would have blown my limbs off. I had trained to apply for Udata quirkless and had built up enough strength that instead of tearing me apart, my quirk would just break my bones. Tears spilled down his freckled cheeks and dripped onto the carpet. His eyes were focused there too. The room was so quiet he could hear his own shaky breathing. When you talk about quirkless people like that, like they're nothing, like I'm nothing, I get so mad. How dare you all say that being a hero is your passion when your words reflect the opposite? How dare you claim that you want to save people when you turn around and say that others don't even deserve to be on T.V? How can any of you think you could ever be my friend when just a few months ago I could have been just another statistic? Only 5% of quirkless people born in recent generations make it into their 20s. Can any of you honestly say you know how it feels to wake up every day knowing that people like you are dying before they even start living? A lot of the time I'm ashamed to even be in the room with you all because I know that if a quirkless person called for help, many of you wouldn't bat an eyelash at them. Feeling as though he had nothing else to say, he turned on his heels and left his audience misty-eyed. The next morning kicked off the weekend and Midoriya was out of the dorms and on his way to his mother's house at 7 a.m. sharp. Not wanting to wake anyone up and risk confrontation, he decided to skip breakfast. The train ride felt like it stretched for hours, and when he finally reached his home, his mother, he was praying that she would be there. "Please, please, please. I'm home," he called. His mother was always an early riser, and if she wasn't working, she surely would be awake right now drinking her morning tea and reading one of her favorite books. "Izuku." "Yeah, Mom." His voice cracked. "It's me." Inko came as quick as she could to greet her baby. She was getting lonely in the house all by herself and already was debating calling her son to schedule a visit. "I missed you so much, sweet boy." She cried quite literally. She gathered her favorite person in the world into her arms and held him tight, as if he would disappear, like he had almost done before. She not so quietly whispered, "I love yous" and "I've missed yous" into his curly hair. Her lips kissed anywhere they could reach, maybe to make up for all the times she wasn't there to do so before and all the times she won't be able to in the future. There in his mother's arms, in the embrace of the only person who had ever loved him even when he was just a quirkless and useless Deku, he felt much less tired than before. This would be a good day. Midoriya started receiving letters midway through his second year at UA. The first letter he received was at the school. It fluttered down as the greenette opened his locker before class. The envelope was pastel green with his own last name written with what looked like dark green marker. A blush painted his cheeks as he hid the envelope in his bag to read later when he got into his dorm, unaware of the set of eyes that wished he would open it right then and there. Classes passed by Midoriya in a quick haze. He couldn't focus on anything other than what could possibly be in that envelope. All day he had been theorizing on what it could contain and who would give it to him. First he ruled out All Might or any staff member because they would have called him aside after class, so he figured it was a student. Oh shit. What if it was a villain? They had been able to break into the school before, and even though the school now kept an even closer eye on their students, there's a plethora of quirks that could be used to break in without a hitch. Calm down. It's probably not a villain and it's just someone who probably doesn't know him well but wants to be friends or something. Probably a student from a different class, maybe the support course or the business course. He had been contacted by a few business course students who wanted to use him as the hero student they had to do a report on for how they could market the hero. Get a grip, Izuku. He thought, clenching and unclenching his fists. Second, he thought that just maybe it could be a love letter. His friend Todoroki sometimes gets confessions in the form of love letters left in his locker from girls. Maybe he should ask his friends about it? He should wait until after he's read it. It would be insensitive of him to share it with them if the person who wrote it wanted to be an anonymous. Maybe they'd want to meet him somewhere? Maybe they didn't. What if it's a joke? Oh no. What if they're making fun of him? Calm down. High school is different. After the final bell, Midoriya found himself racing back to his room, giving a feeble excuse of wanting to study to his friends. He changed his clothes and sat on his All Might bed covers with the envelope in his trembling hands. This is it. His scarred fingers carefully tore the envelope along the top and revealed a folded-up piece of lined paper. Midoriya opened up the paper and found that it wasn't quite a letter. It really was only a sentence. "I have never met anyone as inspiring as you." There was no signature. It was handwritten, so he had something to go by at least, but there was nothing else to show him who could have written this for him. In the end, he didn't tell anyone. Midoriya figured that if the sender wanted him or anyone else to know their identity, then they would have signed the letter. Plus, he guessed that the person was just being kind and maybe he wouldn't mind getting another letter or two. They came more often and were left in other spaces. Sometimes there would be a letter left on Eraserhead's desk before class and he would have to be called up to retrieve it. Other times they were in his locker, and there were a few times that it was left outside of the dorm complex. All of them were compliments ranging from, "Your smile is infectious," to, "I don't think that I will ever meet anyone as naturally heroic as you are." This was very new to the green-haired boy. He had never been known for really being extraordinary before high school, and he was always told that he looked plain too. having an infectious smile or eyes that remind his secret admirer of evergreen trees, and springtime was a brand new experience. Sure, now that he was more muscular and could tame his curls a tad better, more people started calling him cute. Mina even once told him that she wanted to take a bit out of that, and Kaminari offered to let Midoriya sit on his face, followed by, "Come on Deku babe, it's the best seat at you." Of course both of them were joking with him. Probably. He had never considered himself attractive, and neither had anyone else until recently. Maybe sometimes having a quirk really does make everything better? The greenette had decided to keep the letters in a shoebox and enjoy the attention while it lasts. Eventually the sender would find someone new and better, more deserving of their admiration. Midoriya had started a new nightly routine. After dinner he would study for a few hours either with the Deku squad or by himself. He then would shower and change into his pajamas. Under his covers he would reread the small letters that made him feel warm inside before watching a few hero videos and falling asleep. However, one night his routine had been paused due to the quiet knocking at his bedroom door. He was about to open his shoebox when he got a visitor. Koji really thought Midoriya was amazing. His first impression of the greenette was that he was incredibly brave. Not just because the small boy was willing to break his finger in order to throw a ball, but because Koji could tell that the boy was very anxious and yet he still pushed forward. The larger student knew without a doubt that if his sensei had talked to him the same way that he did to Midoriya that day, Koji would have been in tears. He could see how nervous Midoriya was whenever someone looked at the boy for a little too long. He noticed how the green-eyed boy never actually made eye contact with others. He saw the scarred fingers and how they were never idle. He also could tell how much Midoriya loved and hated conversation. How his eyes would light up when others were interested in what he had to say, and how his eyes would dim if Midoriya sensed that anyone was a little bit bored or annoyed. He could see how alike they were. Koji was very anxious too and often couldn't find it within himself to talk to people. He had been lucky for most of his life to have people around him who took their time with him. His family loved him and he had patient friends throughout his schooling years. He was lucky that Shoji had gone to his middle school as well and that they both knew someone when coming into UA. He saw himself in Midoriya Izuku. That was probably the reason why he found himself almost always in awe of the boy. Koji knew how hard it was to push through his anxiety, and from the looks of it the greenette was all just anxiety and determination. Seeing how powerful and kind Midoriya was made Koji believe that he could be like that too. He could be a great hero. When the larger students saw the smaller pushing themselves, it made Koji want to do the same. He was inspired by Midoriya, and that was even before the guys saved their lives multiple times. There was nothing about Midoriya Izuku that Koji Koda did not appreciate. His analysis and intelligence in general was amazing. He loved that Midoriya could talk anyone else's ear off because Koji loved to listen, but he also really liked that Midoriya offered to listen to him too in whatever way he could. He thought Midoriya was strong but soft enough to be approachable by civilians of all ages. He didn't know how to tell the other, until he felt that he had to. A few months into his second year at Udata, Koji's cousin came to visit his home. They didn't live very far away or anything, but with both family members busy with school, they just hadn't made time to see each other. He didn't expect his cousin the already know Midoriya Izuku, Deku. It turned out that Koji's cousin went to the same middle school as Midoriya and that he was crazy surprised to have seen his old classmate at the sports festival. He confessed to Koji that he was not a good classmate and that he had not been mean to Midoriya, but he never stopped anyone from bullying him. He simply just ignored the quirkless boy, the formerly quirkless boy, which Koji felt might have been worse. He was told about all the things that his cousin had seen happen to Midoriya. The name-calling, the beatings, the times he saw people use their quirk on Midoriya, as well as when he saw a partially nasty blonde specifically use their quirk on Deku, a classmate that was way too familiar with Koji, and all the humiliation that the other must have gone through. Letters. Koji has decided that he needed to tell Midoriya how much he looked up to him because it seemed that no one really did. He figured that after all, those years of abuse, that Midoriya probably had a low self-esteem and Koji needed to change that. Deku was the name of his hero. Midoriya Izuku was the name of the person who he drew inspiration from, and he deserved to know it, even if he didn't know who admired him. At first the letters were enough. He liked writing down his feelings, even if it wasn't much, because he imagined Midoriya's blushing face as he opened it. But the greenette never opened them where he could see their reaction. No, they weren't confession letters, but he wanted Midoriya to know that he was special and important to somebody. He was going to stay anonymous because he and his classmate weren't very close, but found that maybe he wanted to be. Maybe he wanted to be able to say it in person, and maybe he wanted to be good friends with Midoriya, and maybe he could want more eventually, but friends for now would be perfect. He could do this. He could be brave for Midoriya, for himself. Eventually he worked up the nerve to deliver his letter in person. With the same envelope color as the first time, Koji packed his letter inside and made his way to his classmate's room. It was rather late at night, but Koji knew Midoriya went to bed much later than most of his other friends. He heard them talking about the boy's terrible sleep schedule before. He stood in front of the door for quite some time, just running through his breathing exercises. His knuckles trembled as they tapped on the door. 3 knocks sounded on his door. Midoriya wondered who could be visiting so late, but figured it was probably Todoroki there to ask him for help with memes again. He'd lost track of the amount of times his half-and-half friend popped up at his dorm for Midoriya to explain pop culture and anything else that might have popped up on their social media. Midoriya quickly pushed off his blanket and shuffled his way to the door. His t-shirt collar drooped over to one side, exposing his shoulder and collarbone. He squeaked a quick reassurance that he was on his way before finally opening the door and revealing Koji. There in his hands a letter. A gasp wiggled its way between the greenette slips, and tears lined his large eyes. He had not thought it could have been Koji. Sweet, strong, dependable Koji. Once again Midoriya's feet moved without thought, and he was in his larger classmate's arms. The greenette nuzzled his head under Koji's rough chin and whispered his "thank you"s and mumbled about how good those letters made him feel. Koji stayed silent, but he too had tears in his eyes. He tilted Midoriya's head and kissed the boy's temple down to his newly exposed freckled skin. He hoped that even though he didn't talk, his actions could show his wonderful classmate how much he cared. Even if it didn't work, he could always write more letters to Midoriya. No one had really seen Midoriya like this before. The green-haired student was angry, and while the class was used to the fire in his eyes while against villains, they never thought he would look this way at another classmate. His friend. Shut the F up, Deku. It's not even a big deal, you have tons of creepy All Might figurines. No one really knew exactly what happened, only that Bakugo had managed to blow up an old toy that Midoriya had. You don't get it, Kaken? The smaller boy sniffed and wiped his slightly runny nose. This one was special. You say that about all of them. Well, it was true for this one. The class didn't know how long the 2 boys were fighting for. They happened to have been the only 2 people who decided not to go out to the movies with the rest of their friends. Midoriya mentioned needing to finish some notes for school and then wanting to write a few new entries in his notebook on some new sidekicks that he saw come into Endeavor's agency. Bakugo said something along the lines of not wanting to hang out with a bunch of extras who were going to talk the entire time anyway. So the large group of teens left, only to be greeted in the common room with the sounds of yelling upon their return. Just get another one of those stupid things. Even an idiot like you could figure out that solution, Deku. Bakugo took a step forward, and instead of moving back in response, Midoriya held his ground. His body was slightly shaking and his eyes were leaking salty tears, but his feet were rooted in place. It wouldn't matter if I did that, Kaken. It wouldn't be the same. Kirishima had seen those 2 fight on a rather constant basis, but after their first year he noticed that their relationship had gotten better. Now that they were second years, the 2 seemed to have been getting along quite well. They still argued like children, but most of the time it wasn't heated, and if you looked close enough you would see that they both weren't upset but actually had fun bantering. That wasn't the case this time. Midoriya was honestly, truly hurt by the loss of this figurine. Midoriya, why is this one so special to you? Kirishima found himself asking. Denki shot him a warning glance. He shouldn't get involved when it came to those 2. I had it for a really long time. It's the oldest one that I've been able to keep in my collection. Midoriya explained with a slight blush on his cheeks. No one knew whether he was red because of anger or embarrassment, seeing as though the entire class was watching his mini freak out. Deku, I know that you have another one of that figure though. Uraraka pointed out. You showed me it before and told me that it was the figure that is most often in store circulation. You could just have Bakugo replace it for you. You're telling me that you're throwing a little temper tantrum over something that you have two of? I'll kill you for wasting my time, you sheet nerd. You don't get it. Midoriya screamed. His eyes scanned the crowd of his friends. He really didn't want to yell at them, and he hated how he knew he looked like a toddler throwing a fit. It isn't about that. I could replace the figurine, but this one held sentimental value. It can't just be replaced. Grumbling something or another about having enough of this sheet, Bakugo decided that now was the time to make his exit. He tried to brush past Midoriya and head straight to his room. He needed some peace and quiet, but stopped by the stairs. It's just a goddamn toy, move on with your life. That was the last thing Bakugo wanted to say. Before disappearing. Katsuki. Once Midoriya said his name, it was like the world had stopped. Not because he was in love or any of that sappy shit, Bakugo just couldn't actually remember the last time that his childhood friend decided to not use that awful kitty nickname. The others must have realized the situation because they silenced themselves as well. I can't just move on, Kaken. Midoriya turned his head to make eye contact with his red ones. This was the last thing he gave me before he left. Bakugo was the only one who understood that sentence. He was the only one who knew exactly how the nerd felt about his father. The blonde knew that Deku still loved the piece of sheet that walked out on the green-haired family, and he knew that the idiot still had hoped that the fucker would come back. He had the audacity to think that his deadbeat dad might turn on the TV and see the green lightning coming from his body and decide that Midoriya Izuku was worth coming back for now that he had a strong quirk. It made the hot-headed boy sick. Deku. I think I don't want to talk anymore. Sorry for acting out like this, everyone. Midoriya said lowly before he used his quirk slightly to make a quicker getaway. It wasn't a secret to the class that Midoriya's mother was a single mom. Some knew because their friend had told them, and others knew because of gossip. Well, not quite gossip, but the Baku squad overheard Ida mentioning that Midoriya's mother was the only person outside of heroics who would visit the boy when he landed himself in the hospital. The class knew that either his father was the hands-off type and not really there for his family, or that he was never there at all. It seemed like they got their answer, for which was correct. I didn't know, god dang sheet. Small explosions ignited in his palms as he tried to clam down. Bakugo would have spoken so rashly if he knew it was that toy. It was like watching a car wreck. Midoriya's classmates wanted to go help the boy and try to comfort him. Well, boys, because it seemed as though Bakugo was fairly freaked out as well, but found that none of them could move. Frozen, they stood as they came to terms with the fact that the so-called toy was actually extremely valuable to their very sentimental friend. So it seems that my services are not needed then? Almost. She had been ready to make a new figurine for Midoriya to replace it. She liked her friend and at first thought that this was the fastest way to make him feel better. Now that it had been confirmed that she was wrong, she didn't know what to do and had just said the first thing that came to mind. Maybe someone should check on the guy? Denki suggested, only to be shot down by Bakugo with a grunt that sounded a lot like him saying to leave Izuku alone. Typically Momo was good at following orders. Her home wasn't what she would call strict, but her parents did have expensive things, and those things were always well taken care of. To do that there were rules. So there were rules like no running in the house, no inviting anyone over who wasn't as wealthy as them for fear that they may steal, and she had a schedule of how often her family would have to dust those items. Momo's parents didn't like other people touching their things, so she could understand being unhappy with someone important being broken. She also was usually good at reading people, and she had a feeling that Midoriya probably didn't want to be alone at this time. She knew what an isolated person looked like because she too felt like that sometimes. Momo could tell that Todoroki hadn't had many friends before because neither had she, with how picky her family was with who she allowed around her. They only wanted the best for their daughter, but it seemed that while she grew up no one had reached those expectations, and as a result the only slumber parties that she attended as a child were with her silenced stuffed animals. She also could tell that Midoriya was not well versed with social interactions, probably because he too was outcast, but she knew he was different. She twisted her ponytail ends between her fingers as they contemplated her green-eyed classmate. He didn't come from an affluent family and she knew how much he wanted to be friends with others, so she had put together that his isolation couldn't have been from lack of trying. Momo could sense his fear of rejection from a mile away by how hard he shakes when he invites his friends anywhere. How excited he gets when they say yes and how sad but easily he accepts their declines. She didn't want to leave him alone while he undoubtedly holed himself in his dorm room wondering why he wasn't good enough. The tall girl went looking for him, and yeah, most of the class wanted to, but Momo was the only one to work up the nerve to knock on his door. Being the polite boy he was, Midoriya opened the door with pink puffy eyes and his pajamas already on even though it was only late in the afternoon. He was silent but allowed her in. Together they sat on the bed. Was no talking and there was no loud sounds either, just them breathing in time with one another. They weren't cuddling because honestly they were not actually that close, but Momo wanted to comfort him without pushing him, so she placed herself behind him with her back leaning against the wall and played with his hair. Her fingers would lightly get caught in his messy curls, but she would just pick them out and move to a different area, lightly scratching and massaging his scalp. Parents did this for her when she was stressed too. Eventually the tension in Midoriya's shoulders lessened and Momo too started to feel better. She watched as his posture slumped so that he was leaning on her more, and she could see the small muffled yawns behind his hands as he tried not to be obvious with how drowsy he was feeling. He must have worn himself out with his tears. She didn't know how long she stayed in there, but by the time she was ready to leave it was dark out. At this time the green bean was fast asleep with his head leaned back against her chest, and she felt bad for the fact that she was going to have to move him and possibly wake the boy. However, luck was in her favor as the greenette was a hard sleeper and hardly even stirred when she tucked him in. She gave a quick kiss the exposed slope of his shoulder due to the oversized shirt Midoriya was wearing. She didn't really know why she did it. But giving that little kiss to her smaller classmate made her feel a bit better too, and if she wrote a small note saying "we won't leave you," and how much she personally appreciates the green boy and what he does for others, well, no one could really blame her. Forgiveness was a concept that Shoji Mizo quickly came to understand. When he was a young child he began to realize that he and his family were different from others. Not once had he found anyone else that looked like him. His mother has a quirk that allows her to shift her limbs to different parts of her body. She was a mother who honestly could have eyes on the back of her head. His father has multiple arms, but they aren't webbed like Mizo's. He knew that his parents really did love him, but he also knew that they didn't want to have another kid after seeing what their quirks looked like put together. He heard them talking about it before. They hadn't meant for him to hear, of course. His family tried being careful anytime they would discuss Mizo's unique appearance, but not much snuck past the boy. Whether he wanted to or not, his quirk allowed for him to hear much better than the average person. Small creaks in the flooring, the flush of a toilet, and many conversations could be heard right from the comfort of his bed. In that same bed was where Mizo found peace, or at least some semblance of it. Even before he discovered his parents' aversion to his appearance, it wasn't hard to see that he made people uncomfortable. Both children and adults alike, although grown-ups were better at hiding it, were visibly unnerved by his presence. He could tell each and every time someone took a few steps back when he traveled near. He could tell each and every time how afraid someone was when he towered over their smaller figure. As a child, Shoji was still rather large, always being the tallest kid in the room and maybe even the building. He could tell each and every time someone would talk to him with eyes not reaching his figure. In his bed was where he learned to forgive them. After accumulating hours in such bed soaking it with his own salty tears, Shoji realized that he could never change how he looks. A fact that most people never learn. Sure, he could gain muscle or chop his hair, but fundamentally he will always look like Shoji Mizo. He would always have multiple limbs. His height would always be intimidating and his face would always be scary. Those three things would always be true. Cementing those as facts somehow helped the boy. It took all the way through middle school for him to stop trying to change himself for the benefit of others. He stopped hunching over and lowering himself to look less intimidating, first. He stopped trying to change his voice to sound less scary, second. He tried to stop wearing his mask, but after making multiple children cry in public, he decided that maybe it was okay to just show his face at home, third. Once he stopped trying to morph himself into a different package, Mizo realized that it was easier to like himself. Shoji Mizo began to kind of enjoy being different. He was thankful that he could see over crowds. He found that it came in handy for navigating public transportation. His mother said that he hugs just like his father, which Mizo knew was what made her fall in love with the man. It turned out that his quirk would be really good for heroics. He realized this after saving his family from their burning home. His heightened sense of smell caught the scent of smoke when the flames on his living room curtains were still easily smothered. The small portable heater next to the window was the source of the fire and was easily unplugged and thrown out. He saved his family with his quirk. He was a hero now, and Mizo knew about plenty of heroes who looked villainous, but people still trusted them with their lives. He forgave himself for having a terrifying quirk, as it was the reason why he could save others. Of course, Shoji had not realized that he would be saving people so early in his high school career. After everything that happened during his first year at UA, he started loving his quirk. Sure, he couldn't sleep without dreaming of that portal, and sure, he can't go to the mall without looking over his shoulder, but he knew he saved some of his friends' lives. For the first time ever, he had other people who liked him and his quirk. His classmates didn't shy away from him, and they didn't make excuses to leave conversations with him. He has actual friends. He has best friends. Tokoyami actually told him that he was a joy to be around. Shoji couldn't believe it when his classmates all willingly asked him to join them when they get together. Shoji was bombarded one day with questions about his quirk. It wasn't too uncommon for a brave soul to approach him and ask a few things. Most of the time it would be a boy who was interested in if he always won at arm wrestling or something silly before they'd hurry away. Midoriya was the first classmate to ask about his quirk during his time at UA. The green-haired boy did not actually mean to ask him anything. It was more like Midoriya mumbled everything that he wondered about Shoji, and in turn Shoji decided to answer them. He never thought someone would be as interested in him as his friend Midoriya was. Midoriya loved to ask him details about his quirk. Green eyes would sparkle with each inquiry, and Shoji didn't mind the positive attention, so he answered each question as they came. He never dreamed that someone would be utterly unafraid of him. Yet, here he was with his friend Midoriya, who always mumbled his thoughts but never once said anything bad about Shoji. In fact, Midoriya would take it a step further and stuck up for Shoji whenever anyone said he looked odd or whenever people would not so quietly whisper about him. His friend was proud to be there with him, and even more shocking was that it was Deku. The future hero Deku. The future #1 hero Deku wanted to be his friend. Midoriya laughed at Shoji's jokes, and nobody does that. It might seem silly, but Shoji liked to think he could be a funny guy sometimes. However, most people don't like to engage in a conversation with him long enough for him to ever really reach a punchline. His shrub-colored friend listened to him all day sometimes, and never had Midoriya made it seem like he was unwanted. Midoriya Izuku was the first person who Shoji Mizo knew liked everything about him. His friend loved his quirk, loved his humor, and basically everything else that Shoji tossed at him. For the first time, Shoji felt forgiven. Maybe it wasn't forgiveness, because Midoriya had not been mad at him in the first place. He had never been scared of Shoji, and he had never told Shoji that he was freaky looking. It was more like Midoriya made him feel like he was forgiven, like there was one person who, despite his obvious flaws, was able to accept him for all that he was. Shoji came to learn that being friends with Midoriya is one of the most exhilarating and exhausting things someone could be part of. Don't get him wrong, he never got tired of being with his friend. He was tired for his friend. Shoji spent much more time in hospitals than he would like, and more often than not he was just a visitor for his green friend. He was so tired of seeing his kind classmate in casts, and he was even more tired of how it seemed people encouraged it. Shoji was not foolish. His teachers would claim to care about Midoriya, but they never truly tried to keep him safe. They would try to protect the boy from villains, but never from the boy himself. They would ask him to be more careful but wouldn't do anything. Mizo didn't know exactly what he expected from his mentors, but he knew that Midoriya deserved more. He knew that Midoriya deserved teachers who noticed his chronic pain and helped him with coping mechanisms or encouraged him to see a physician. Instead, they would only chastise the broken boy. He knew that Midoriya deserved to not be so scared, or maybe it was him being anxious. Either way, Midoriya deserved to feel comfortable in his own skin, It was obvious that he wasn't used to positive attention or people generally being nice to him, yet it seemed that none of his teachers noticed. Not one time did Shoji hear any of their teachers suggest the boy get professional help for his mental state. He desperately hoped that conversation would happen soon. The student hoped that he would be able to forgive his teachers if it didn't. The locker room was mostly empty, only a few students were left lazily throwing on their classroom uniforms. Shoji was used to being one of the last stragglers getting changed. He liked to take his time and he didn't mind showing of his hard-earned muscles. Every once in a while Kirishima would comment on his form and ask for workout tips. It made Shoji happy that others could see how hard he was working. There was still quite a few things that he was insecure about, but he had worked long and hard both in the gym and in the comfort of his bed to get to a place where he could appreciate this aspect of himself. After a few minutes, Shoji realized that he hadn't seen Midoriya leave. Which, to be fair, wasn't exactly anything for him to worry about. His friend often rushed off to speak with teachers or maybe a student with an interesting quirk that the boy wanted to ask a few questions about after the end of the school day. Usually the larger student would at least see the smaller scurry out the door though. Shoji decided to take a look around just to be sure that his friend wasn't trying to sneak in extra practice again. Shirtless and gazing into the bathroom mirror was how Shoji found Midoriya. His friend's scarred finger gripped the basin of the sink hard enough for tan knuckles to turn white. But Shoji never actually realized how marred his best friend was. The green-haired boy wore pink and slightly raised marking past where his uniform usually covered. They started at the tip of his middle finger and traced his form past his forearms and collected by his shoulder. The longer Shoji looked, the more he could see. Tiny starburst patterns were scattered across the back of the boy's shoulders, leading down towards one large scar just under his shoulder blades. Another starburst. One that went past the pink hue of the others and turned a dark purple, or maybe it was blue. Shoji couldn't exactly tell, but it looked like it hurt. "Oh, Shoji, you're still here." Shoji hadn't realized how long he was observing his friend. "Yeah," he answered, unsure of what else he could say. The multi-armed student knew he should say more. He wanted to ask how his friend got those scars and desperately wanted to make sure Midoriya was okay, but he couldn't get his mouth to move. Shoji knew that as hero students they should all be expecting to have a few scars. He had some smaller ones from trainings and one that still ached now and again when it rains from their summer camp, but none compared to Midoriya. Shoji expected Midoriya to have some too, of course. He knew of the times his classmate would break his bones and everyone could see the lines that were woven onto the green boy's hand and up his forearm, but he had never expected this. It brought tears to his eyes. He tried to find something, anything really, to say. "Sorry. I usually try to change in the stall." Midoriya gestured with a slight nod of his head towards the door of the nearest one. "But I figured everyone would have left by now." "Why would you apologize?" Shoji sputtered. Of course Midoriya would be self-conscious. Of course his anxious and sometimes shy friend would want to hide his injuries. Shoji knew how looking different could make someone feel, especially when surrounded by others. It took him years to change in front of his family, let alone his classmates. No one should have to see these. Midoriya answered, stepping away from the mirror. His eyes trained on the floor. "I don't want to remind anyone." Remind them of what? He wanted to say. Yet once again his jaw stayed locked. Shoji watched as Midoriya pointed to a small cluster of indents that gathered around one of his biceps. "I got these from Shigaraki." Shoji only then noticed how they could have been shaped like someone's fingertips. If Tsu saw these and recognized where they were from, then how would she feel? Would she feel scared all over again? Would her mind transport her to the place of her nightmares, to USJ? She even told me last week that she still dreams of Shigaraki's hand reaching out for her face. Midoriya finally made eye contact with Shoji after releasing only what could he heard as a sad chuckle. Or could it be that she would be relieved that I hold these marks instead of her? Crooked fingers ran through Midoriya's green hair. A wet hiccup followed the question. "She would never dash," Shoji tried to refute. "Todoroki always looks at my hands. He knows that some of these are from him." Midoriya flexed his fingers, once again casting his gaze away from Shoji. He apologizes almost every month, which happens to be an improvement from his weekly ones. Todoroki feels guilty every time he sees them, every time he sees me. Just being in the room with him is a reminder of something I know he regrets. Shoji's body finally moved. His feet first as they all but ran to his smaller friend. All 6 of Shoji's arms circled Midoriya while one even rested on the boy's largest scar. Lightly. He didn't know why, but Shoji thought it was important. He needed to show Midoriya that he didn't care what he looked like. Midoriya felt so small in his arms. Shoji found that he almost enveloped his friend. His hand firm but softly pushed on the boy's back. He could feel the textural difference of Midoriya's scarred skin compared to the rest of his smooth back. Shoji pulled Midoriya close until they were chest to chest with his face in the scarred boy's shoulder. "I didn't want you to see me, Mizo," Midoriya cries. Tears soak Shoji's shirt to the point where he could feel where the boy's damp eyes were squeezed shut. "I don't want you to be scared when you see me. I have some from that night too, Shoji, from the summer camp. What if you can't look at me now too because of them?" The boy in his arms was full on sobbing, and all Shoji could think to do was lay small feather-light kisses along the back of his shoulder. Sometimes hitting a smooth portion of his freckled skin, but mostly his lips would ghost over the small raised patches of pink. "I could never be scared of you, Izuku." Ever since he could remember Ida, Tenya knew he was destined for greatness. At least that's what everyone said. Born into an affluent and powerful pro-hero family, Tenya could tell his future was already mapped out. Both of his parents were pro-heroes, his elder brother was too. Even his grandparents held the profession, and he knew that was what he was meant to do. Made to do. When he was little, probably around the age of 7, Tenya had a theory. Young Tenya had spent most of his life watching and learning from his family, as most children do. Long nights were spent laying on the cool hardwood floor of his bedroom wondering why they all looked the same. Him and his family. The resemblance scared him. He had seen photos of Tensei when he was Tenya's age, and they looked exactly the same. The hair color, the eyebrow shape, the same quirk of their lips in that smile, it was all too similar. Now, Tenya was a smart boy and knew that most people look a little like their parents. Sometimes they had their mother's eyes or their father's hair color, but Tenya looked a little too much like his parents. Like they had split their DNA and chose what aspects they wanted him to have. That was exactly what he thought. One look into his brother's biology textbook from school was all he needed to confirm. He was a man-made fake boy. A specimen grown in a lab to look and act and feel like an Ida. Why his family would do this he didn't know, but he was going to confront them. This was wrong, and Tenya always tried to do the right thing. It turned out, however, that his family just had really strong genetics and that his parents had similar quirks. After a long talk with his mother and a tearful conversation with his brother where he tried to convince Tensei that they both weren't real, he was shown LTR's ND photos. For whatever reason, they put him at ease. Actual physical proof that he was his mother's son. Upon this realization, Tenya was faced with the consequences of being an Ida son. The near-daily training starting from the age of 10. Sure, it was tons of fun running around with his brother and sparring with his mother, he would never deny that. But there were times where it was equally as stressful and scary as it was exhilarating. He soon was shown the painful Ida secret to growing stronger and faster engines. Over and over he would go through the process of getting his engines removed from his legs. Being virtually quirkless until his body replaced the missing appendage. He loved his family and still does to this day, but Tenya knew that not every family goes through such methods to strengthen their quirk. The Ida family was always loud about their affection for one another. Praise was given out daily. His father would notice his growing muscles and his grandparents would applaud his academic prowess. Tensei loved him fiercely and would give him pep talks when Tenya felt insecure and vulnerable enough to say anything. His teachers were loud about their expectations. They would light up each and every time his last name was mentioned, as if it was a privilege to teach someone of his family's status. Certain teachers would pay him more attention than others, but all of them would find a way to worm his hero family and his hero future of following in their footsteps into conversations. Tenya found himself constantly repeating, "Yes, I do plan on becoming a great hero like my brother," and, "I have been training very hard, thank you for asking," with the occasional, "Oh, thank you for believing in my future." All of his teachers encouraged the family tradition. At first he loved his family legacy. He loved how people would often believe in him with just hearing his name. Tenya took pride in the safety and protection that his family gave to the community. But soon it became less of a fairy tale. People would comment anytime he messed up and would whisper about him if he was not professional all of the time. He was always representing the Ida family name after all. There was something that the head of the Ida household did before every dinner. Tenya's father would lead a prayer giving thanks for the food but also giving thanks for the strength of their family. Which, yeah, it sounds nice but it drags on. He spends minutes listing out the strengths of each family member and then asking for help as he proceeds to list their faults as well. The patriarch claimed that this was a bonding experience, that everyone would know each other much better afterwards. Tenya held his tongue for much longer than he would like to admit, but he was able to live with the habitual humiliation until he wasn't. The stain incident put a large damper on the Ida family's mood. With Tensei being permanently in a wheelchair, he was no longer able to carry on being a hero, being the one thing he was ever told he could be. Tensei felt lost. Something that Tenya could understand, seeing as though he himself felt the same. Tensei was supposed to be the most successful. They all knew it. He managed to climb the hero ranks faster than any of their family members. He also was oh so charming, which helped raise public opinion for him too. Tensei was equal parts lovable and threatening. The perfect mix for a perfect hero. How could Tenya ever live up to that image? If Tensei got hurt, what would happen to him? Tenya didn't think he could live with himself if he disappointed his parents like that. He witnessed the sad faces and heard the sobbing behind closed doors at odd times of the night. Tenya cried then too. It was before dinner, during the family prayer, that Tenya found out his father's true feelings. The patriarch thanked their God for giving Tensei the strength to persevere, but then criticized the vulnerability that he now had. Their family members spoke of how Tensei went from the strongest to the weakest and prayed that he figure out a way to not be a burden. A burden? As if his brother had not been injured in the line of duty. Honorably. His career ended early, but he was still loved by the community. He stated such at the end of the prayer, but was met with a hard stare and a stern lecture of respecting his elders. Tenya learned to bite his tongue and hone his talents. He always stuck to his diet and his workout and his school studies. It was his turn to hold the title of the strongest up-and-coming Ida. He decided if his father wasn't going to honor his brother, then he would, by carrying on with his hero name. Their hero name. Ingenium. Eventually time went on and his father admitted that he may have been a little harsh, but only because he may have been grieving the loss of his hero son. Tenya took that as the only apology he would get and ran with it. The atmosphere became less tense as he started to succeed in he noticed his family relax a little. A tiny fraction of the tension in their bodies were gone because he was meeting their expectations. He was really doing it. Tensei was happy for him too. He said so himself, and he also was grateful that Tenya was using their hero name. Once in a while Ida, Todoroki, and Yaoyorozu would talk about their lives as hero descendants. None would go into too much detail, but they all had a sense that strict households ran in hero families. Tough training and lasting study sessions filled most of their afternoons growing up. All were attending schools ran by ego-stroking adults who sung their praises and promised bright futures. Expectations seemed more common to Tenya than he would have liked. Tenya came to realize over time that some expectations could be okay. They could be great even. This being because during any training exercise he can expect Midoriya to be there to back him up. Mostly because his friend always tries his hardest and is genuinely a strong person, but also because he has a knack for finding others when they need to be found. His top example would be when Midoriya illegitimately saved his life with Todoroki. Tenya could expect his friend to be there for him in and outside of battle. He could talk to his friend about new moves they were trying to perfect and about Tensei's recovery. Izuka made it clear that all he expected of Tenya was that he was a good friend and a hero who tried his best. He could do that. He could accomplish that. There was one conversation that they had that Tenya couldn't stop thinking of. He and Midoriya were talking back to the dorms after class and were talking about their recent exam grades. Tenya had gotten a 96% on the exam and honestly was feeling great about it. He strives to stay above 95% but loved to reach higher. Midoriya got a 87%, A score that Ida would have panicked over. He would have lamented over all that he could have done better and how he will improve. All the next day and the following nights he would wallow in his mistakes reminded by his father during their evening meals. He asked his friend a personal question. One that Ida never thought he would ask anyone, for it was something he should not care about. Midoriya, what does your mother think of your grades? Midoriya awkwardly chuckled. What do you mean, Ida? I mean, is she satisfied? Ida cleared his throat. Does she care that you did not get an A on the examination? Oh, no, my mom is very proud of my scores. Honestly, my class placement is better than she could have ever imagined. She mentioned that the other day. His voice dwindled into a quick mumble. Tenya strained his ears to try and catch what his friend was saying. He wanted to know if Midoriya's mom said other things as well. If his mom said good things after saying that she didn't expect anything from him. He managed to pick out a few phrases like, didn't think I would pass the exam, to, honestly didn't think I'd be here still, and, I don't think she expected me to be so happy. Ida found it odd that Midoriya's mother may not have thought her son would be happy. For all he could see, Midoriya loved training to be a hero. He had a whole thing about smiling while fighting, and Ida couldn't see why Midoriya Inko would think he could be anything other than happy. The entrance exam, correct? You mentioned a few times that you only scored rescue points without knowing of their existence prior. Tenya asked. She didn't think you would pass either? Well, yeah. She didn't think I would pass way before my scores came in. My mom thinks I'm fragile, which yeah. I do break my bones a lot. Midoriya scratched at his chin, but I can also handle myself. She never really thought I had a chance. It was always like she never actually expected much from me at all. Never actually expected much from me at all. Ida thought more on that very statement as he found himself on his dorm room floor. Flat on his back. He rested and pondered a reality where his family didn't expect anything from him. Where they let him eat whatever or eat up whenever. Where they let him sleep whenever and wherever. He pictured a world where they supported him even if he weren't a hero, or even a world where he was a hero but maybe he wasn't scared to let them down. He also thought of a reality where they thought nothing of him at all. Where they assumed failure at his every turn and told him so. He focused on how it would feel to not know of his future. To have no plans because no one would think that you could get that far. No map made for him ahead of time. How lost would he be? Was that how Midoriya felt? Was he simply an overachiever, or was he never thought of as being able to achieve anything? Ida hoped that his friend didn't feel those things, but judging by his hero name's real meaning, Deku, Ida was pretty sure he knew his answer. You know, Midoriya. Ida grabbed him by the shoulders, making the other face him completely. I thought you were going to score higher. Shock rocked through his friend's facial expressions. The green-haired boy's skin turned pink as he settled on embarrassment. Ida continued, I told you during the sports festival that you're a rival to me and I only choose the best. I expect you to push me academically and in training, and I expect you to push yourself too. I'll help, but you must strive to reach your best performance. Ida was nervous that maybe he had gone a tad too far, but he was trying to prove a point. Midoriya had someone now that knew he could do great things. That expected him to. Someone to prove right. Ida would have liked that amount of expectation too. I'll study. You're my rival, I swear, and I've been trying my hardest, I promise that too. I might take you up on your offer for help, huh? Midoriya said while rubbing the back of his neck. Thank you for caring, Tenya. A smile crept up Midoriya's cheeks and spread to Ida's. Their lips stretched as they grinned at one another. Neither thinking that the other knew how important this moment could be. Would be. Or maybe they were. Maybe that was why Tenya lost his breath upon the impact of his smaller friend barreling into his chest. Small but strong arms wrapped themselves around his middle while Tenya's larger ones seemed to surround his friend's entire frame. Tenya could rest his chin on Izuku's head and did so comfortably. He ran rough calloused hands through thick curly green hair silently. Izuku gripped the back of his shirt firmly, wordlessly. Tenya nuzzled his cheek against the nest of hair he was resting on and left affectionate kisses along where his lips rested. Whether Midoriya could tell he was doing it or not, Tenya felt like he was leaving actual proof of their friendship, of his support. Red. Himiko Toga dreamt of beautiful thick liquid covering her dainty hands. God, she loved this dream. She felt her heart rate spike as she liked the imaginary blood from her fingertips. It almost felt real this time. It almost felt as though she really was sitting on the boy's chest, and the sight was heavenly. Beneath her was Izuku, the one boy who she desperately wanted to know more about. She even told him so. Oh, how she loved to think back on the times she got to see him in real life and not just in her silly little dreams. He looked downright tasty when she first saw him covered in the liquid gold that pumped through his veins during her Vanguard Squad's camp outing. Toga loved how his green ringlets held onto those precious droplets of blood, practically soaking it in. She couldn't help but have to see him again. That's why she just had to visit him during his exam. The boy was the cutest she'd ever seen, and she knew he loved her back. Why else would he have recognized her while on his mission? How else could he have seen through her disguise as Ochako-chan if he didn't appreciate who she really was? Izuku loved her and she loved him even more. Toga loved when his tiny freckles were covered in bruises and held at odd angles on his broken limbs. She loved his crooked fingers and wondered if she could keep one or two to remember him when she breaks him for good. The blonde really wanted to break him. Maybe that was why she found herself constantly dreaming of the hero? She wanted to crush his bones like he does to himself and watch as his skin becomes decorated with red. Toga wanted to taste it. Saliva filled her mouth even in her dream as she leaned closer to the boy's face. His eyes were large and green, the whites were tinted pink and glossy from tears. So pretty. She scratched her long nails against his bare neck, creating thin lines, allowing more of the thick substance to leak out. Toga couldn't hear what Dream Izuku was saying. Her focus was solely on liking the very area she had just touched. Her eyes closed as she tried to savor the thick blood that now rested on her tongue, but there was no taste. There was never any flavor in her dreams. Toga Himiko had spent much of her life trying to deny the person that she really was. Her parents had encouraged her to push her quirk away and ignore the urges she felt when she saw blood or even just a person who caught her interest. There was always a certain pull, a tugging in her chest and a tingle in her teeth when she saw someone who looked particularly appetizing. The first time it happened, she didn't really mean to kill the boy. Honestly, she just wanted to show him how much she liked him. He was so cute, and she knew he would be so tasty. She couldn't help but want to know everything about her old classmate. Toga wanted to know the small things about her first victim, like what his favorite color was, what his favorite food was, and what he sounded like when he screamed. Over time she realized that she wanted to know more. She wanted to know how he felt to all of her senses. Toga longed to see how he would look covered in her own favorite color, how he would sound begging her to stop even though she knew he secretly loved it as much as she did. She really wanted to be the one to put pressure on his arms and feel his bones crack. Most of all, she wanted to taste his blood and be able to smell it lingering on her when she went home. She loved killing him, and she knew he loved dying because he loved her. Toga knew Izuku was the same. The blonde could tell that she would be doing the little hero a favor by cutting him. He obviously had a thing for pain. Why else would he beat himself up all the time? Unless, maybe he did it for her. How could she have missed it? Of course, Izuku-kun was trying to get her attention. He knew how much she loved his blood and was trying to show her that he was ready for her to take it. He just had to keep it a secret because of course he would have to hide his love from the heroes. They would judge him like they did her, and Toga didn't want that for her precious person. She wanted him to rest safely in her arms, always covered in that beautiful red. Even when she was awake, Toga fantasized about Izuku. Everywhere she looked, she was reminded of her crush. Shrubbery reminded her of his hair, and any sight of a hero reminded her of her boy's training and goals. The blonde had a goal of her own. She was going to keep him to herself. Toga didn't want to share anymore. Toga hated that she only got to have him to herself in her dreams. She wanted to take her time tearing his skin and drinking what seeps out. She wanted it to last days or maybe even weeks. Her other toys never lasted that long, but she knew Izuku was special. He had a lovely pain tolerance, as if he was built just for her to take apart again. She needed to rescue him from the mean heroes and keep him from her friends too, especially Shiggy. The boy who was always scratching was always talking about Izuku. Toga listened many times to her current leader's rants about the adorable boy. Shiggy liked to make threats about Izuku and he also wanted to tear him apart but not in the nice way like her. The older boy wanted to disintegrate Izuku and waste all of the important bits. She tried to point it out before but the temperamental boy freaked out and accused her of questioning his authority. Whatever. Maybe when she finally got Izuku she could make a movie. She could video herself cutting and breaking and drinking from the mini-hero and maybe that would show Shiggy that she was right. Izuku should be savored and bruised, and bloody, and absolutely beautiful. She could share a little bit but only because she was such a nice person. It had been so long since she'd actually seen her lover, future lover she supposed, they weren't official yet. Toga had only been able to get glimpses of him recently and only on weekends when he visited his mother off campus. Anticipation was building in her small body, she could feel a buzzing in her fingertips and an itching in her gums. Toga desperately needed to bite something. Someone. Thankfully she wouldn't have to settle this time. Finally. Her little Izuku was in the hospital. She could visit him. Apparently he was fighting some other villain that Shiggy wasn't even in charge of and the guy broke her toy. Izuku was supposed to be hers. He was fixable and that was okay because she got to see the fight on the television at the bar. She watched the screen as Izuku ran around flashing his quirk and was thrown again and again into the side of a concrete building. The villain he was fighting was tricky and his quirk allowed him to feed off of the fear of others. The more people were scared the stronger he got. Toga watched as Deku, she loved his hero name and how cute it sounded. She'd whisper it to herself at night, tried to get the crowd to leave. The green hero tried to reason with the civilians and get them to move but many were either frozen with fear or too stubborn to miss the fight. It was because of them that Deku got hurt. He fought, but it wasn't until others arrived on scene that they were able to force the pedestrians back enough for them to stop fueling the villain. Toga watched as the villain was allowed to put his hands on her toy over and over, each time having the privilege of leaving his own marks on the boy. Toga desperately wished to be the one making him bleed. She wanted to be the one who kicked Deku so hard you would hear his legs snap through the screen. Well, she could at least visit him now. Breaking into the hospital was super easy and actually quite boring. It was quite dark and all Toga had to do was lure some doctor after their shift into helping her and she would steal his blood and identity. She was polite and thanked him the whole time. She really did. He must have been very moved by her thankfulness as the doctor wept tears of joy. They had to be tears of joy with how pretty it was mixed with his own blood. Toga couldn't take her time with her victim. Each second she spent with him was another that she could have spent with Izuku. She quickly finished him off and daydreamed about how Izuku-kun would taste so much better as she swiped the identification card that allowed access to the hero ward. His room was easy to find. For whatever reason Toga felt she always could find her crush. She only had to open 10 patient room doors until she found the one she wanted. Surprisingly, it wasn't very guarded. Well, maybe not too surprising as she did have to kill a couple of guards that were stationed to keep watch over the ward, but they were shockingly easy to take down. Just a little stabbing did the trick, but she had to be fast. Toga knew she was working on a time limit. Eventually someone would either find the body of the doctor or the bodies of the others and she'd have to flee. She had just enough time for a quick visit and maybe even a snack. Izuku had a few vases of flowers decorating his room but not much else. They had the room to themselves. The note on the board attached to the wall said that Recovery Girl would be here tomorrow to fully heal the hero and that he had been put on heavy pain medication in the meantime so that he'd hopefully sleep until the hero arrived. Perfect. Toga could still see purple splotches that started from the boy's cheek and traveled down below the medical gauze that covered his lower neck, and she assumed it went down his chest. Upon close inspection Toga noticed how long Izuku's eyelashes are and got the urge to pluck them out one by one. However, she knew that would be much better when Izuku was awake so that he could look at her while she does it. Toga moved as nimble as she could. She wanted to live out her dream. She lightly sat down with the boy's hips clutched between her thighs, trying not to put too much weight on his leg cast. Normally she would want Izuku to wake up so that they both could experience the wonderful event that was unfolding, but she knew he would yell and they would have to stop. Toga decided tonight she would just play with her toy a little bit and would save the rough housing for when they had more privacy. A small knife was the only real weapon she brought with her, but it was more than enough. Toga trailed the tip of the knife down his clavicle, leaving small but rather deep incisions that hopefully the real medical professionals wouldn't think twice about. Oh wow wow wow. Izuku tasted so good. Toga knew he would. She knew that his blood was practically made for her, his heart pumped just for her. Why else would it so willingly trickle out? It seemed that Izuku was enthusiastic about her being there without him. Even knowing. They traced her fingers down his scarred arms down to his wrists where they could almost feel it throbbing. His pulse called out to her like a siren, and who was she to deny herself the pleasure of swimming through his thick liquid? She wanted to drown in it. Her eyes fluttered and she sunk her canines into his wrist, warranting a JRK of his muscles. She couldn't believe her luck. He didn't wake up from that either. Her lips attached to where she bit and diseated, bite marks littered his wrists and up his neck to his ears. Oops. There was no way the other doctors wouldn't notice this. Heavy footsteps were heard rapidly beating against the tile in the hallway. Toga knew that she had to move fast if she wanted to escape, but there was one other thing that she always wanted to do. She bit down for the last time and coated her lips with the beautiful red that she loved and made sure to speckle his bandages with them. Her kisses were rushed, but they left the stains that she wanted. Along the parts of Izuku's bandages that had managed to stay white until now were littered with lip stains. Toga loved when girls in movies put lipstick on and then kissed their lover. She liked how it lingered on the others, and she knew she wanted to see Izuku with those marks too. She thought he looked even more pretty now. All decorated black and blue with streaks of smeared blood down the top of his chest, neck and wrists, the bandages now redesigned with lip marks from her not-so-gentle kisses were a great touch in her opinion. She even left some on his cast. She was the very first person to sign it. He looked gorgeous, and she was the one who had the pleasure of putting those marks there, not Shiggy and not that other villain either. Screams echoed throughout the hallway signaling it was time for her to go. She eyed the window, finding her escape route. Carefully Toga left her spot on her lover's lap and leaned to whisper in his ear, something that she wished he could somehow hear. "You taste so good, Izuku. I bet you knew that already, didn't you? I bet you wanted me here all along, and I was happy to help out a close friend. You're welcome, of course." She giggled before hurriedly continuing as she heard doors open and slam nearby. "Thank you for all the fun, but I have to go. Don't forget that I love you and that you're my toy to play with." The worst thing about her quirk was that she could hear everything. Everything. Each conversation in any given room that she was in would always get stuffed in Jiro Kyoka's head. Whether she wanted to or not, she knew your business. Plain and simple. It's been that way since she could remember. Every fight that her parents had left its own little brand in her mind. Searing as she could recall each nitty-gritty detail, because not only was she gifted a super hearing quirk, but she was also blessed with a great auditory memory. Jiro wasn't exactly sure if it was part of her quirk, and neither was her doctor. Her dad liked to say it was a classic chicken or the egg situation. Either way, she was glad that her parents were very much in love. What she was not fond of was gossip. At least not anymore. When she was younger, Jiro realized that information was power. Well, maybe not in those words. When she was in elementary school, she found that more people wanted to be her friend if she told them what other people were saying about them. Some wanted to know if their crush liked them back. Others were more interested in rumors. She found that the more she listened, the more they wanted to talk with her. As long as she was useful, she knew she would have friends. Until she didn't. When she was a bit older, Jiro realized that information was scary. During early middle school, she started to hear things about her. How it was creepy that she could hear anything they said. Some of her classmates liked to whisper and call her a stalker when she was near. They'd be just loud enough for her to hear, but for their teachers to stay clueless. She couldn't stop listening. The purple-haired girl couldn't stop perking up at the sound of her name and even that nickname they gave her. As much as she hated hearing what people said about her, she couldn't make herself stop. It was part of her. During her last year of middle school, people became less scared of her and more into making fun of her body. She knew she was a late bloomer. Honestly, Jiro didn't really think she'd ever turn into a flower if her current BRST size said anything. It didn't matter that her classmates knew she could hear them. They'd continue to chatter away at the prospect of her never having a boyfriend being due to her small chest. A few particularly nasty girls liked to theorize over whether she'd die alone or cave and pay for a melon's job, all while purposefully making eye contact across the room. It didn't help that Jiro wasn't even sure that she wanted a boyfriend anyway. Things got better at Yashur. There were tons of loud noises that spooked her at all times of the day. And yeah, she has to live with both Kaminari and Mineta, but everyone seemed kind. Everyone seemed kind, to her at least. Jiro rarely picked up on anyone sheet-talking her, and if she did, it wasn't often enough to truly get under her skin. What she did hear was a lot of talk about her classmate Midoriya. Her ears were plagued with the rants of what sounded like a madman followed by explosions. She could hear each syllable that flew out of the blonde's mouth. She could hear each insult that Bakugo hurled at Midoriya. That was something everyone could hear. Jiro was the only one that heard the compliments. She was the only one that heard the explosion god practice his apology for weeks so that he'd get it just right when he decided he wasn't too much of a chicken. She heard how he'd theorize on what would Deku do, and even tried to come up with workouts he could do with his childhood friend to help them both improve. Jiro had figured that Midoriya heard those things too. She was wrong. Midoriya had a voice that was constantly ringing between her ears. Not like an alarm bell, but almost like a constant thrum, practically ticklish when he began to mumble. Most of the time she heard him work through his homework problems or theorizing about some quirk or another. Jiro was beyond surprised when she heard the green-haired boy speak with Ochako about something completely different. You don't get it. I don't think it can be fixed. Midoriya's voice was soft and wavered as if caught in the wind. He hates me. But Deku, you guys were childhood friends, weren't you? Can't you just make up? Hasn't it been long enough for you two to get over whatever it is that you two have going on? Jiro could hear the confusion in Ochako's voice. The purpled-haired listener had thought that at one point too. Why hadn't the two just decided to SCK it up and be friends? I thought we were friends, Ochako. But that was when we were really little. If I'm being honest, I don't think Kaken has ever liked me. Jiro could practically hear the tears pool and eventually overflow down freckled cheeks. You know that's not Dash. It is. Midoriya raised his voice, making Jiro rub her elongated earlobes. That's what she got for listening in so closely. I followed him around since I could walk. I ran after Kaken since I could run. Never once did he seem to want me there. He was always ahead of me, and he'd always known it. Kaken's better than I could ever hope to be, and it'd be selfish of B to try and demand his attention like that again. Tiny pops from Midoriya clenching and unclenching his fingers reminded Jiro of popcorn. That was about as much of that conversation that Jiro thought she could handle, and she quickly headed into the elevator. Not only did she have to listen to Bakugo raving about the green-haired boy, but now she had to hear that green-haired boy put himself down while raving about Bakugo. What a mess. Could Midoriya really be that insecure? It was a question that made its home at the forefront of her mind. Bakugo wasn't the only Deku fan in their class. In fact, Jiro had overheard almost each of her classmates mention the boy in one way or another. Almost always positive. It was often, Deku's so smart, or Midoriya is crazy strong, and I hope he feels better soon. I'd had to have my arm twist like that. The last one was usually followed by a shudder. The point was, Jiro heard a multitude of compliments a day for Midoriya, and he probably heard much fewer. Jiro wanted to change that. It started as simple data collecting. She wanted to be able to keep track of what she heard throughout the day, a sort of diary of sorts, when she realized just how many people looked up to the green-eyed boy. At least a quarter of the conversations that she heard centered around the boy. So, in Midoriya-like fashion, she grabbed a notebook and wrote an entry each time she heard someone say something kind about her classmate. She wrote down when people wondered about his workout routine, when they wondered what product went in his hair. She even wrote down that time where Aoyama monologued about how delighted he was that Midoriya would get to try some of his cheese. It wasn't her place to judge. After a while her notebook was practically bursting at the seams, she only needed to present the book to Midoriya. She wondered what he would say. Maybe he'd find her creepy too? Was this technically stalking? It certainly was the closest Jiro ever thought she'd come to it. The opportunity presented itself after Deku had a particularly hard time during their rescue training. Each student was paired with a partner for a game of glorified hide and seek. The scenario was that one was to hide and the other was to be the hero and find them amidst the rubble of their training ground that now looked like a dystopian city with dilapidated concrete buildings. It turned out that Deku decided to hide right behind the wall that Sato was punching through with his sugar rush strength. Not expecting his classmate on the other side, Sato knocked down the wall without knowing the integrity of the building would be demolished, making it collapse. Making it collapse on top of Midoriya when his partner was Mineta, a person who did not have the strength to dig him up by himself. Deku was trapped under rubble for 10 minutes. Luckily, large slabs had fallen around him, causing there to be a small pocket just barely Midoriya-sized where the slabs stacked on each other in a sort of teepee shape. While unharmed, Jiro could tell it was hard to Deku to be stuck there afraid to move and have the entire building fall. She thought after such a hard training day he could use a good pick-me-up. Originally, Jiro planned to leave the notebook by his door and bolt away, but before she'd finished knocking, Midoriya had already opened the door with a greeting on his lips. Feeling flustered and embarrassed, she shoved the notebook into the other's chest. Don't think I'm weird." She twirled her earlobes, a nervous habit of hers. "I just heard some people say a lot of nice things about you and decided to write them down. I figured maybe you'd want to hear them." A quiet "oh" left Midoriya's mouth, and before he could really respond, Jiro was already started to make her escape. A firm yet gentle grip on her wrist stopped her. "Thank you," he whispered in a way only Jiro could hear. His cheeks blush red and his freckles seemed even darker. Maybe even a bit cuter. She'd heard someone mention it before, how when Midoriya's face heated up he happened to look like a strawberry. Jiro found herself wishing that she'd wrote that down too. Before she could stop herself, she'd already turned around and softly planted her lips on his freckled cheek. Right across the four shaped like a diamond. The very ones she'd heard Bakugo frustratingly agonize over. She could understand why. Jiro detached herself as fast as she'd kissed him and practically dashed down the hallway. In the comfort of her bed, she tried to listen for the inevitable happy crying that her classmate would be doing as her lullaby.